Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another live stream. We've just started, so make sure to tell me if the stream's alright. You can hear me, you can see me, all that good stuff. I see people are still filtering in, but might as well get it started. Hello to both of you in the comments right now. How's everybody doing? I will tell you, it is mighty cold where I am. Hello, Shadwai. Hello, Shaheen, Umut. Good to see everybody. I don't know about you guys. I'm in the northeastern United States, and we are getting some cold weather right now. Though, it is quite a bit colder further north from where I'm at, so it's not too bad, I suppose. Doing amazing. That's great, everybody. Alright. Another live stream. So to give the sort of agenda for today, and we won't be starting immediately. We'll do a bit of chatting and all that first, sort of ease everybody in. But I think today we're going to be doing some Epimetheus videos. I believe that is how you pronounce the name of the channel. I plan to start with the rise and fall of the Sassanid Persian Empire. That's the one I particularly wanted to do. And then I've got a couple others in mind, but I'm also open to suggestions for other Epimetheus videos or just other suggestions of videos to do in general. Extra Credits just released their new vid on Old Fritz. Oh, really? I see. Yes, they have. You know what, though? I'm going to save that for a recording. We're going to leave that for a recording to be uploaded. But I am very much enjoying Extra Credits Frederick the Great series. I forget what part we're at on the channel so far. I think either part 1 or 2. But I've recorded videos to every part they've released so far. So, probably tomorrow or in a couple of days I'll react to the new Old Fritz video, part 2. Alright. Part 1. Alright, got it. So we've got part 1 uploaded on the channel so far. I keep up when they release them, but I've got like a particular reaction schedule to maintain, as I'm sure you guys have noticed. I like to cut some stuff in, keep a bit of variety going, so I don't usually upload several of the same series in a row, but I do keep up, and I've been very much enjoying the Old Fritz reactions. Love from Pakistan. Hello! That's where you're from, Shadwai. I always find it curious to see where people are from. Not to not to dox anybody. That's weird. But if people are comfortable with sharing, I always find it interesting to learn, where my viewers are from, because it brings in a lot of different perspectives on the stuff that we talk about, which I think is really cool. So yeah. We have the... Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. Hard to dox from almost 2 billion people. That's exactly right. I mean, some people are kind of sensitive with location information, but, most of the time, if you tell the country you're from, it's hard to get super specific from that information, right? Yeah, I mean, obviously, India has a massive population, so regardless of what topic your channel covers, you get a lot of Indian viewers. Like, I haven't really done Indian history, and I would absolutely like to do some Indian history at some point, but I haven't done Indian history, or at least very, very little, and even so, there's a sizable number of Indian viewers just due to the massive amount of people in India. We have a viewer from Lebanon. Hello, Christopher. Very interesting. Okay, Shaheen. Your ancestors migrated to India during the Umayyad Caliphate from Iran. That makes sense. I mean, obviously, I know you have a, a big interest in that topic, so that background makes sense. Shad Y, I realized it mentioned Jats a lot. I'm actually one myself. Ah, okay. Interesting. Yeah, I remember that during the Muslim incursion into India reaction. Very interesting. Yeah, I do like to cover, ideally, a wide range of topics. And I would definitely like to do more Indian history at some point. It's just, there's a lot of stuff to cover, and it's difficult to fit everything in. Ancestors were first tribal farmers, then a respected warrior class up until the British Raj. Huh, that's fascinating. It's always interesting to me when y'all, have information on your ancestors, and then that sort of brings you to an interest in history. I don't have too much information on my family line, my ancestors, so my interest in history is pretty much divorced from that. But I do think it's interesting when you have some sort of personal stake. Yeah, same for me, Umut. I really don't know about my ancestors, like, at all. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, caste and all. Alright, that's a good way to know. I mean, my research, I primarily look at... I'm most interested in, like, the long 18th century, especially mainland Europe, France, and the United States. And if I had to guess, my ancestors were probably peasants in Scotland for a long time. Maybe they came from somewhere else. I really don't know. Yeah, there's a number of people who are interested in genealogy and their ancestors and all that stuff. But I think most people probably have sort of light to very little knowledge on their ancestors. But, I think if you have connections with your family and all that kind of stuff, you can probably trace all that kind of stuff back. Magma. Your ancestors migrated to the British Raj during the Second Afghan War. Wow. Oh yeah, that's certainly true, Shad. A lot of Europeans, when they trace their ancestry back far enough, you are in some way related to royalty. I'm sure I have that sort of relation in the past. All I really know about my family is the most recent sort of few generations. That was mostly like working class, poor Scottish people. And so my guess would be that we're talking about probably that sort of background, but there's always some relation to important figures, even if it's rather distant relation. All right. Unless anyone else has... Yeah, a lot of people's royal genealogy goes back to Germany. This is very true. I'm thinking that we'll start with the Epimetheus, rise and fall of the Sassanid Persian Empire. Like I said, that is the one I intend to do first, and that is basically the only one I specifically intend to do today. So we'll go through that one, and then if y'all have other suggestions for reactions, I'm completely willing to entertain those. So, let's hop right in. And, some of you probably know, because you've been in streams before, but feel free to leave comments. I always love to engage with viewers while we're talking or while we're watching stuff, and especially with a topic like this, the Sassanid Persian Empire. I've learned a bit through watching some of these videos, but a lot of you know a lot more than I do. So feel free to give me any information I am missing. Yep, the Sassanids who tried to emulate the Achaemenids of old and failed miserably. I mean, they definitely saw some success. The Sassanid Empire was rather impressive at times, but of course, you know, we have the rise of the Caliphate. But we're jumping ahead. Let's jump right into this video. And also, I think the audio level should be alright, but if it's too quiet or too loud, then just let me know.
For more than 400 years, the Sasanian Persian Empire of Iran Shah proved to be the only equal of Imperial Rome and nearly destroyed it.
This is true. And we've talked about this a couple of times before. Both the Persians and the Romans, you know, you could say they had a lot of ego. Now, in many ways, if ego can be justified, it was justified. Two very powerful empires. And I'll talk about the Romans in particular. They had a view that everybody except them was basically uncivilized barbarians, and the Persians felt similarly, but the exception to this rule was that Rome and the Persian empires had a level of respect for each other. They saw each other as close as they could to equals. Now, of course, both felt they were superior to the other, but they felt that they were equals on a certain level, in contrast to every other power, which they saw as, like I said, uncivilized barbarians. Yes, we did discuss that on the Discord. And by the way, anybody in here right now who isn't in the Discord, you should absolutely go join the Discord. I think, you know, you'd have a good time, you'd enjoy it. We talk about history, we talk about the videos, all that good stuff. So if you're not already in the Discord, please join. Christopher, I would honestly say the Sasanian empires played a far greater role in Iranian culture and history than the Achaemenids. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I don't feel I can make an authoritative claim on that. my Persian history knowledge is not up to scratch. But, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, Shadwise, exactly right. You'll get to do stupid stuff with Light X Heaven himself and me. We talk about a lot of different historical topics. So, definitely jump in the Discord.
In its own end, the Sasanian Persians viewed their empire as the restoration of the Achaemenid Persian Empire of their ancestors, that had once been the undisputed master of much of the known world.
And by the way, not to pause too much, but this is a live stream, so it's a lot of going back and forth, so we'll be doing a lot of pausing. I would like to do more content on the Achaemenid Persian Empire. I think the only video I've done on them was the patron-only, members-only video on, like, the administration of Persian empires, and they talked about, by kings and generals, I believe, and they talked about the Achaemenids a lot. So that was honestly sort of my introduction to the topic, sort of how they developed their bureaucracy and their system of government. So I would like to do more Achaemenid history in the future, and send any suggestions my way if you have them, because this is a topic that I know like nothing about. You know, I know a bit about the Sassanids, a bit about the Parthians, and the Achaemenids, not much at all. Parthians and Seleucids were heavily influenced by Greek culture. Parthian rulers even inscribed their coins with "Lover of Greece." Sassanids wanted to re-Persianize the empire. Huh, that's interesting. Instead of following the example of the tolerant Achaemenids. Okay, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, when we look at this period, say I don't know what you'd call it, like the Mediterranean world plus the Middle East plus Persia, that whole region, we have a lot of influence from Greek cultures, Greek ideas. Regardless of the empire, we have a lot of different empires. The Romans, the Carthaginians, the Macedonians, the Persians. Regardless of who we're talking about, it seems like a lot of these empires took a lot of notes from Greek culture and the Greek way of doing things, which is interesting. Huh. Yeah, I'll have to look up some videos on the Achaemenids. And then I might be able to get a better idea of the comparison between the Achaemenids and then, the Parthians and Sassanids and the Persian empires that followed afterwards. Because I'm still pretty spotty on that aspect of it.
Until it was conquered by Alexander of Macedon, and following his death at a young age, much of...
And another one, I would love to do some videos on Alexander the Great. I've gotten a couple of recommendations from some of you in chat right now. Don't worry, I intend to get to Alexander. In fact, I've got quite a few videos on the back burner, but once I get through what I have scheduled, and that's going to take us all the way into March, I think Alexander's like the next thing I'm starting on, because I would really love to do some content on Alexander. Oh, we have King Edward Longshanks here. Shapur I was the greatest of all the Sassanid rulers. He was a military genius who humiliated the Romans the worst since Hannibal Barca. Yeah, I'm a little familiar with Shapur. It's a very familiar name. And, we're getting that education from Edward Longshanks, so there you go. Achaemenids, Seleucids, Parthians, Sassanids. Yeah, I'm familiar with the chronology, though I gotta be honest, I often forget the Seleucids are even in there. That is the empire that I know the least about, but I do know, at the very least, sort of how it plays out. Oh, okay. Yeah. Shad, you're filling some stuff in. Seleucids were a Greek dynasty, like Ptolemy, who grabbed power in Persia after Alexander's death. Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. And they were in constant decline. Maybe that's why I don't know too much about them. All right, great. I love the extra information I'm getting.
This region was ruled by the descendants of Alexander's general, Seleucus.
Well, there we go. We're also learning about this timeline from this Epimetheus video. So,
Onion Plateau then fell under the control of the nomadic Parthian Arsacid dynasty. Although initially a Seleucid vassal, they later gained full autonomy and then took control over the remnants of their former master's empire, as they had been greatly weakened by conflict with Rome. Even though the Parthians were an Iranian-speaking people group, they initially ruled as Hellenistic-style kings, adopting Seleucid Greco-Persian court customs, while still maintaining elements of a nomadic tribal government.
Yeah, so, and this sort of displays where I learned about this from. Like I said, I know the most about the Sassanids, and the second most about the Parthians, and that's because my knowledge of classical history revolves around Rome. And I mean, this is fairly typical for someone who's grown up with Western education and Western culture like myself, but I know a bit about ancient Greece, but primarily about Rome. And so a lot of my knowledge of these Persian empires comes from their interactions with Rome. And so the bit I know about the Parthians is when they had some sort of conflict or interaction with the Roman Empire. And then same with the Sassanids. And the Sassanids were super important to the Eastern Roman Empire, which is why I know a bit more about them. And then, of course, I know a bit about the rise of the Caliphate, so that sort of fills in some stuff as well. But I mean, that's where my knowledge base is. Before all of this, I knew about Rome, and that's how I knew about, say, some of these Persian empires. Parthians were a nomadic group in the north of the Persian Empire. Yep. And some of the stuff y'all are covering in the comments we're getting in this Epimetheus video.
Despite claiming to have restored the ancient Persian Empire, they were still viewed as foreigners by many of their subjects, especially in the Persian homeland of Pars in southern Iran, also known as Persis or Fars, which seems to have become a largely autonomous, locally ruled province early on. The Parthians were satisfied as long as taxes were paid on time and men supplied to the army when needed on campaign, particularly horse archers and cataphract heavy cavalry, forerunners of the later medieval knights. In the early 3rd century AD, the Parthian or Sassanid dynasty was preoccupied with fending off Roman invasions and the disunity of the royal family, with the empire being split between two rival brothers, each claiming legitimacy. So it was of little importance to
Balash and Artabanus the Fifth. Yeah, I mean, two fellas I have literally never heard of. But I'm sure if you're familiar with your with this history, Persian history, then you're very familiar with all of this.
To them, when a local family of priests of the fire temple of Anahid first took control of one city in Persis, and over the following 2 decades, consolidated power over the whole province. This conquest was completed by Ardashir, and had been initiated by
Ardashir, another familiar name.
His father. By the time the Parthians had realized that the house of Sassan, named after Ardashir's grandfather.
Okay, that's probably why I know who Ardashir is. So he's very important in the formation of the Sassanid Empire, or the transformation from what we see to the Sassanid Persian Empire. Very interesting.
Had gathered too much power and would not be content to serve the Parthians as military governors. Their initial responses were too little and too late.
And I'm trying to think, we're talking about the middle of the 3rd century here. And like I said, I think more from a Roman perspective. And Rome would be going through the crisis of the 3rd century. Like, Rome is in flames for most of the 3rd century. And so that sort of explains maybe why there was no, say, Roman incursion at this time. Or, because I'll put it this way, I can imagine a situation where if this sort of infighting was happening and Rome was strong and unified, they might have taken advantage. But, like I said, Rome is basically on fire for most of the 3rd century. Base Persian history. That's exactly right, Trevor. I'd like to learn about a bit of Persian history. It's fascinating. Because, I always think great empires are interesting, particularly those that we might talk about a little less in the Western world. We talk about the Romans a lot. We might learn about some of the Egyptian empires as kids, but the Iranian empires, the Persian empires, we don't talk about them much, and yet they are pretty damn important when we're talking about this time period. Sassan was a Zoroastrian magi, and Sassanian crowns were dope as hell. Yeah, that's an interesting looking crown.
Ardashir defeated the nearby, ineffective, and poorly motivated local governors that were sent by the Parthians to bring him in line, and proceeded to annex their territory, rallying many local Persians to his cause. The Ashoka the Great king, Artabanus V, then led the full force of the Parthian army to confront.
Yeah, Trevor's right. We only talk about it in the context of the 300 movie. I mean, it's kind of true. Like, we if you're talking about like sort of, and I mean, I'm talking about America in particular, right? But I think this is true for a good number of Western countries. We don't talk about these Persian empires that much, and one of the main mentions they get is in context of the movie 300, and sort of this portrayal as this like Eastern threat to Western civilization, which I think is sort of a ridiculous framing, but that is like some of the main airtime they might get.
Front Ardashir at the Battle of Hormozgan, and was soundly defeated and killed in battle. Over the next 2 years, Ardashir firmly established his rule over the Iranian plateau, and was crowned Shahanshah, King of Kings.
King of Kings.
First native Persian to hold that title since the days of Alexander's conquests.
Wow. Okay. I mean, I can see why Ardashir is an important fella, eh? Yeah, and King of Kings. That is the title that I am also familiar with. The 300 movie was created against the Islamic regime of Iran. It's more of a geopolitical issue. Huh. Achaemenids were very tolerant. but the satrap of Ionia was not. That's why the Greeks viewed them with such disdain. Ah, okay, that's interesting. And that particular context is interesting. Shahan Shah. Yeah. I mean, it's always interesting looking at how history is viewed, how it's interpreted in different regions of the world by different people. Shadwai says, not really, it's just another movie. Well, I don't know the context of the movie 300. All I know is the movie itself and sort of how it's, how popular it's been, and how that makes people interpret the history. I don't know the context behind the movie or its creation or whatever. Yeah.
More than 500 years before. 3 years later, Ardashir had taken the Arabian coast of the Persian Gulf and defeated Balash, the...
Wasn't the movie made from the embellished point of view of the Greeks? That's why it's so exaggerated. Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, basically. And it is a pretty cool movie, right? I mean, it's... When you talk about historical movies, some are more going for accuracy, some are less going for accuracy. I think 300 is definitely one of those that is very stylized, takes a lot of artistic liberty with the story. So they're not really going for any sort of accuracy, I don't think. But, I mean, yeah, it's definitely a movie which boosts the Greeks, the Spartans, and presents the Persians as sort of enemies. Greeks, on the contrary, were more heavily equipped than the Persians. That's why they held out for so long. Huh. Yeah, look. Light army of Persia, difficult to fight against heavy infantry. Yeah. I mean, I think most people know not to look at 300 to actually learn the real history. Yeah, that's what Trevor's saying. My favorite real moment in history being, this is Sparta. I think most people understand that they shouldn't be taking actual history knowledge from these movies, but these sorts of movies do alter how people view history and the world, even if not in a sort of direct way. Though I think the movies mostly, it's a bit of fun. It's very stylized. Anyway, back to the Sassanids.
Brother of Artabanus in Mesopotamia, bringing him into contact with Rome. In contrast to the Parthians, that preferred a defensive strategy against Rome, using hit-and-run cavalry tactics on the wide-open plains of Mesopotamia, the Sasanians took the fight to the Romans, confronting imperial legions with heavy cavalry. Ardashir battled the Romans off and on for the remainder of his reign, achieving more minor successes than failures, most notably sacking and destroying the wealthy and heavily fortified city of Hatra. He always campaigned with his son Shapur, who he made his co-ruler for the last 2 years of his reign, to ensure a smooth succession. Shapur and his successors would carry on Ardashir's plan of massive urbanization.
Hey, there's Shapur. 240 to 270. Like I mentioned earlier, an important fella, and even to someone like me, a familiar name. One of the few names from this history that I would actually recognize. That shows, I think, how important he is. We're also still talking about a time when Rome is in quite a bit of inner conflict, which I'm sure was beneficial for the Sassanids. Even if they're not historically accurate, they ignite a sort of curiosity about the real events that lead people to learn about the real thing. I agree with that. That's how I look at a lot of these historical movies that maybe might not be so accurate. If they encourage people to be curious and learn about the history, then in my opinion, I think that's usually a good thing. Unless they're doing a real disservice or purposefully misinterpreting something. As long as people are getting interested, I think that's good. We see Conquer Von Zap using one of our custom History Student Reacts emotes, which you can yourself use if you subscribe to the channel members program. Just a quick little shout out and an ad break there. The stand of the 300 was insignificant from a strategic standpoint. Yeah, there we go. We got Shaheen also using the little history student reacts cookie emote. Repping their channel memberships. I always like to see our channel members in chat. Thank you for all the support, everybody. Some of the only Iranians, I would say, that have a better military record than Shapur are Nader Shah Afshar and Cyrus the Great himself. Shout out to Cyrus. Yeah, I mean, Cyrus is certainly someone who people know.
Building hundreds and perhaps thousands of cities during the Sasanian Empire, and built a vast system of dams, aqueducts, reservoirs, and cisterns to ensure these cities had a plentiful supply of fresh water, allowing for larger populations. Shapur's reign was long and eventful. He successfully campaigned in the east, annexing large portions of territory there. In the west, he conquered Armenia, a fiercely independent warlike kingdom that had often played the deciding factor in the balance of power between the Roman and Parthian empires.
This is true. Armenia is a very important country at this time. It really helps to shift the balance of power. It's one of those things that's right in the middle, and depending on who has it or who has the alliance of Armenia, that can sort of tell you maybe who has the upper hand at that time. I also do love to see a country, Armenia, classic Armenia of the late antiquity. Exactly, Sheen's exactly right. I like to see a country that we can still see on the map today. Now, obviously, the Armenia of today is extremely different than the Armenia of then. It's not necessarily a straight line. But I do think it's interesting. You can look at a map in the 3rd century, point out something, and then fast forward, roughly 1800 years to the modern day, and point at the map and say, hey, there's Armenia. I recognize that. You also have a similar thing with Georgia, though I think it was called Iberia at this time. It can be a little confusing because we have also the Iberian Peninsula, Spain and Portugal. But Georgia was hanging around at this point. But yeah, Armenia was rather important at this time,
giving an edge to whatever side they had allied with. After defeating the Emperor Gordian, Shapur then negotiated peace on favorable terms with his successor, Philip the Arab. However, this peace would be short-lived, with Shapur campaigning deep into Syria, conquering many of its cities, including Antioch, one of the most wealthy and populous in the Roman Empire.
Oh yeah, Antioch's an important city. And Valerian, we're finally getting to a Roman emperor who I actually recognize a little bit. Of course I've heard Philip the Arab, but Valerian stands out a little bit more. The Sassanids came to power during the 3rd century crisis. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're seeing right here. I'd like to see them pulling this stunt during the glorious 2nd century. Yeah, and that's sort of the point I was making, in that I would be willing to bet that the chaos Rome was going through during the 3rd century absolutely helped the Sassanids come to power, and they didn't have to deal with a strong reaction from the Romans, at least until a bit later. Parsia, hello, welcome to the stream. We're doing some Sassanid history.
Valerian responded with a force of 70,000 men. He reconquered much of Syria, and he personally led them into slaughter, with almost the entire force being annihilated, which included the Praetorian Guard. The emperor, with a few remaining survivors, tried to negotiate, but was captured instead, and was taken deep within Iran Shah, where he lived out the rest of his life in captivity.
And obviously this was extremely humiliating for the Romans. I mean, to have something like this happen, you're having your 3rd century crisis, everything's going bad enough. This is the cherry on top. This is extremely humiliating. Your biggest rival has fucking stolen your emperor, nabbed him while he's on an expedition. Just not good at all.
With his exact fate and year of death unknown, this event sent the Roman Empire into shock and panic, and initiated a series of civil wars.
And we can also see how I was talking about earlier, how I know a bit more about the Sassanids than previous Persian empires, because of how often they pop up in Roman history. And one of the reasons why is because Rome's center of power has now shifted eastwards. You know, when Rome's center of power is Rome, Persia, while still an important rival, is a little further off. When Rome's center of power is Constantinople, these two are right next to each other. And so Persia pops up far more often. He actually got gold poured down his throat. Yeah, there's a lot of stories about Valerian and what happened to Valerian. And I'm not exactly sure on the truthfulness of a lot of these stories. But in one way or another, they basically entirely humiliated Valerian. But I've heard the gold down the throat story. Battle of Edessa was an absolute disaster. Shapur killed like 75,000 Romans. Yeah. That's interesting, Parsia. Shapur had the Roman soldiers build cities, infrastructure, because they were known to be great builders. I mean, I think that's a reputation fair gained. The Romans were certainly talented at infrastructure and building. Yeah, Christopher sort of doubts this story. I really don't know. I mean, someone with a little more knowledge of the time period might be able to judge it, but at least from what I know, we really do not have proof of these stories. We just have the stories themselves. And so we basically don't know what happened to Valerian. Obviously, the whole getting captured and taken back to the Sassanid Empire was embarrassing and humiliating enough. We don't know to what extent they really, tortured him, basically. Some of the stories we've heard could be true, maybe not. I don't know. Battle of Edessa was the first time the Romans faced the might of the Sasanian heavy Pushtigban Salars, the heavy cataphracts. Yeah. But yeah, Rome was not having a good time at this point. But we're sort of coming to the end of the 3rd century crisis.
And rebellions. Shapur also brought back many thousands of Roman civilians from Syria to populate the newly built imperial cities throughout the southern portion of the empire, with artisans, skilled workers, and men fit for military service being particularly sought out for relocation while on campaign. Shapur greatly increased the size and centralization of the government.
I mean, I knew a bit about Shapur, but you can sort of see why he's so remembered as such an important Persian leader, right? All the stuff he's accomplished, expanding the empire, literally nabbing a Roman emperor, though emperors, were of less value at this point with how quickly they were coming and going, building up infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. Roman authors usually embellish the deeds of Sassanid monarchs to demonize them. Yeah, this is exactly true. Roman authors did this to the Sassanids. They did this to a lot of opponents. They loved to over-exaggerate. So, I'm sure a lot of the stories we've heard about the brutality of the Sassanid forces or the Sassanid monarchs are just that, stories, or at least over-exaggerated. And Light X Heaven is here. Hello, one of our premier chat members. Also one of our most prolific Discord members. Once again, shout out to the Discord. He says that the Sassanids are godless barbarians who dared to attack civilization itself, Rome. Yes, well, I suppose if you're a Roman, that might be the perspective you come at it from. One of those newly built cities was Bishapur, where Valerian lived until his death.
Many of the powerful familial clans and minor local shahs had essentially run most aspects of local government in Parthian times.
Wow. Now look at the hat in the middle. What is going on there? We've got sort of like a bit of a Santa hat, but it's got like some sort of animal or demon face on the top or something. I love that hat. I mean, the hats are very interesting, but at least these two on the other sides are a little more traditional. This one in the middle, my goodness.
and kept most of their previous privileges and duties to the Shah and Shah. However, the host of newly built cities and their income were property of the Shah and Shah. Governors, viceroys, and a host of other appointed officials managed these. Importantly, a standardized set of laws were implemented throughout the empire, and law schools set up to supply the many judges. Shapur's reign...
King Edward Longshanks. Light X Heaven is a propaganda master, I have noticed. Yes, we can see his mastery of pro-Roman propaganda in the year of 2023.
Reign was characterized by toleration for the many religions within the empire.
Toleration? We talked about this earlier.
The teachings of Mani, the prophet of the Gnostic-influenced Manichaeism, which aggressively challenged the beliefs of the older religions in the region, and was even welcomed in the royal court to share his beliefs. And although seeking to refute the teachings of the fire goddess Devanahid, which Shapur was the high priest, and the ancient Persian Zoroastrian faith, which he also widely promoted, Mani was allowed to preach throughout the empire and gain many converts. Shapur appointed Hormizd, widely believed to have been his youngest son, to succeed him to the throne. His maternal grandfather had been a prestigious Parthian noble who was slain by Ardashir, and his appointment in part may have been to please the Parthian nobles who had joined.
Yes, we've got a lot of Roman history fans in the comments. I am no better than a man. I mean, as you might be able to tell from the reactions that we do on this channel, I do a lot of Roman history. I very much love Roman history. My, academic focus is not on Rome. You know, I've talked about it's more the long 18th century. But secondary to that, Rome very much catches my interest. But things are not black and white. This is exactly right. I mean, I don't look at any history as black and white. You always got to try and see the nuance. But, you know, I have a bit of fun with Roman history. I can't help but be a bit of a fanboy. Epimetheus also has a 10-minute video summarizing the history of Islamic Iran. Maybe we'll do that one after. Yeah, and of course, as Shad Y points out, the Rome propaganda stuff is a bit of fun. And it is fun, let's be honest. Spreading the word of Rome in 2023. Hormizd is Middle Persian version of saying the Old Persian and Avestan name. Oh my goodness. Abu Ramazda, God in Zoroastrianism. I apologize for my pronunciation of some of these words. You know, I'm only an innocent English speaker trying to pronounce words in other languages. I try my best, I really do. And Shad Y is, has his mission to react, or not react. I'm the reactor. He's going to reform the Roman Empire, and I will react to it.
The Sasanian cause a generation before. In addition to him being the most warlike and fiercely loyal to his father during his reign. During the short reign of Hormizd, he widely continued his father's policies and was regarded as a good ruler. Strident competition between Mani and the Zoroastrian priest Kadir became one of the most hotly contested issues of the day. And after Hormizd died of an unknown cause, he was not succeeded by his son, but his brother, Bahram I. Mani was summoned to the court and scolded for not...
Oh yeah, we're gonna do another vid after this one. I mean, well, I guess we'll see how long this takes us, but I expect we should have time for another 1 or 2 videos after this one. So I'm definitely open for suggestions to what we do afterwards. I would perhaps like to do another Epimetheus video, because this is like the first time I'm doing this channel, but I'm also open to anything you guys would like. But we are going to get through this one first. Unlike Caesar, Light X Heaven has not yet been deified for his efforts on the YouTube community. Yeah, maybe that'll come for your plentiful comments on I mean, I see you all the time under my reactions, and then if I ever look at any other reactions on, say, Napoleon, Light X Heaven is always in the comments. So he's keeping up to date. Kartir is a very interesting figure in Persian history, a priest that worked behind the scenes to endure the hegemony of the priestly caste and Zoroastrian faith all over the empire. And then Shaheen says, Kartir was a very famous Zoroastrian priest. His status were founded in different locations across Iran. Interesting. Yeah, Zoroastrianism's fascinating. And I think it often doesn't get much attention because, obviously, of the Islamicization of Iran, or whatever you want to call it. And so often Zoroastrianism is sort of not covered, but it's definitely interesting.
Providing any benefit to the empire, and was imprisoned. Bahram supported the short-lived Palmyran Empire and its in her.
The Palmyran Empire, Zenobia. What? Oh, dude, there's so much interesting stuff. I'm not trying to get sidetracked by Roman history because there are many points I could go off, and we could talk about Roman history for ages, but. The breakaway empires of this period. Fascinating. OSP has a video on ancient Persia if we want to stick to the theme. All right. That one will be kept in mind for after we're done this.
Her struggle with Rome. But after Rome reconquered the territory, both sides were ready for a peace treaty, and Bahram died shortly after. His brother Narse, the king of Armenia, was passed over for his son Bahram II to succeed him.
Barbaric Zenobia. Okay, let's talk about the Palmyran Empire and how Aurelian smashed it. Yes. Look, Zenobia clearly was a sort of ambitious and I think capable leader, but, you know, she took it a step too far. And the Palmyran Empire was smashed. But I do think the breakaway empires of this period are very interesting.
He was supported by Qadir in his ascension to the throne, and he fabulously rewarded him in return, giving him control over all the Anahid fire temples in the realm, with the Shah stepping down as high priest. He also made Qadir the supreme judge of the land, replacing the judges with Zoroastrian priests. In 283,
Zenobia will sue Bitcoin saying Imperator Augustus Ethan. Yeah, I'm getting my coins minted for talking well about Zenobia. No, I mean Shadwise right. I think Zenobia took it too far, you know, and that's what screwed her over in the end. You know, it seemed like Roman central authority was collapsing. She felt like she could go out on her own, leave Rome behind, and it didn't work out for her. Oh well. The power of Rome. Imperator Augustus just means emperor. Well, you know, I would like as many variations of emperor before my name as possible. So that would be great.
Bahram was occupied with putting down rebellion by his cousin in modern-day Afghanistan.
And I got Parsia backing up my interpretation. I agree. I think there is something interesting and impressive about the Palmyran Empire and some of these breakaway states. And I see someone like Zenobia as, like I said, you know, fairly capable, very ambitious. And perhaps that ambition is what really did her in the end. But that is also what sort of made it interesting.
And the Roman Emperor Carus took advantage of the situation and invaded Mesopotamia upon hearing news of the civil war.
Kaiser, Princeps, Augustus, Imperator, Basileus, Ethan Cook the First. Yes. That'll be my title.
His campaign was successful, and it is believed he took the Sasanian capital of Ctesiphon for a short
Oh my.
and was allegedly struck by lightning soon after.
What?
causing the Romans to withdraw.
There's no way that's what happened.
To reconquer Mesopotamia. The Armenians then revolted and defeated 2 attempts by him to retake
Typical
it.
Armenians.
Along with temporarily losing the capital.
Okay, wow. So we saw the Sassanids sort of start off real strong, but then the Romans are kind of chilling out a little bit, and coming to, and now a lot of stuff sort of falling apart for the Sassanids. All the sources say he was struck by lightning. Wow, really? That's kind of crazy. It would be the third of his name because 2 mythological Ethans ruled before him. Not in my new Rome. Yeah, we have to decide what naming conventions we're using in our new Rome, which will certainly happen, of course.
Severely damaged his reputation. And when his son, Bahram III, was appointed the next Shahanshah, rebellion immediately broke out, and his grand-uncle Narsa seized the throne. Seeking to legitimize his rule, Narsa called a council of all the nobles, many of them family members.
Most likely killed in battle or got assassinated by his own officers. That's how it usually went for Roman emperors campaigning in Persia. Exactly true, though, and I suppose we'll get to him in this video. We're going to get to my boy Heraclius. So underrated. I think, I'd love to do more Heraclius coverage. The 2 eyes of the earth are in the ritual of kingship. Historian Matthew P. Canepa was one of the best books on Roman and Sasanian history, and that's great. A book recommendation. I will write that down. 2 eyes of the earth, Matthew P. Canepa. Yeah. That's true. I mean, particularly early on in the Empire, they were careful to... Though, that is true, Shadwai. They wanted to avoid the title king given their history, but I would sort of agree. I am surprised they never did it later on, because let's be honest, as we get further into the Empire, these emperors are no longer afraid of being associated with kingship. Although maybe, they're even above that. I don't know. But that might explain why they never used the title King of Kings.
To vote on who should be the next Shahanshah. He overwhelmingly won this vote. Narsa spent nearly every year of his entire reign on campaign against Rome, and initially had great success, repelling a major Roman invasion and reconquering Armenia. He was then defeated by a combined Roman-Armenian force that captured his wife and several other of his family members. He then agreed to a peace...
Yeah, and I think Shadwai is correct in that, I made the point that I don't really think they cared that much about avoiding association with kingship later on, but at that point they had their own norms and traditions that sort of might have meant more at that point.
Treaty and relinquished all rights to Armenia in exchange for the return of his family members, and died soon after.
Yeah, what exactly does Basileus translate to? Because they did use that title, Basileus, during the time of Heraclius. Yes, that is true. Christopher is right on that. Basileus. Just another name for emperor. Oh, okay. Greek for Augustus. Well, there you go. I guess one amongst many titles. Parsia says, Rome just kind of half-assed its way into monarchy in the end. I mean, as time goes on, the emperor becomes more and more powerful, more monarchical, and more, deified to a certain point. But, yeah. That's what I'm saying about Basileus or Vasileus. It's kind of like Imperator, but it also has more of a monarchical, what's the word I'm looking for? Connotation, because of how Rome was ruled at that point. So I think it is kind of more like king, monarch. Though, of course, it can be a bit complicated when we're talking about translating terms from one language to another, from one culture to another. But I do believe it was a little more monarchical, but also like when you're at the point where you have an all-powerful emperor, it's kind of like, do we have like, what is the distinction between that and a monarch? Maybe there's still one culturally, or at least in the minds of Romans, but it wouldn't really matter at that point. Yeah, Imperator sort of changed in its usage over time. Lydex7 points out the most interesting thing about the Roman imperial government is that they never did the whole bloodline succession thing. Not really, anyways. And I would kind of agree with Shad Y in that, honestly, the Romans never figured out succession at all. This may not have been a specific plan not to do bloodline succession. They messed it up a lot, all the time, continuously. Basileus is a name in my language, and it's associated with simpleton. What language is that? I'm curious. While female version is associated with wise women. Yeah, Christopher makes an absolutely based observation. The Byzantine government being such a chaotic mess is a proof that they are truly the Roman Empire. This is true. Sometimes the word Byzantine is used to mean complicated and whatever. This is exactly right. The complicated succession, the court intrigue, this is absolutely proof, if you needed any, that the quote-unquote Byzantine Empire is the Roman Empire. Yeah, well, the thing about, I guess kind of the sad thing about Augustus, I mean, Augustus was a great Roman emperor, and throughout his reign, he tried so hard to make succession work, and he had such a difficult time with it. He put so much time towards succession. Like, he might be the emperor who put the most effort towards succession. Like, he really thought about it. He really tried. Unlike a lot of Roman emperors who, it seems like great emperors and then just forgot about who was to be next. And Augustus still didn't, I don't know. His succession was alright. It didn't go terribly with Augustus, but it could have gone a lot better. Miss me with the Byzantines fighting civil wars over the bitsy territory they had in the 14th century. Yeah, truly the heirs of Rome. They've got tiny little territory. They're still fighting with each other over it, even though we literally have the Ottomans. All of his intended successors did him a great disservice by dying without his permission. Shame on them. And that's exactly it. Like, it's not necessarily Augustus's fault, but he tried so hard, and yet he still really struggled with succession. Alright, back to the Sassanids.
Had returned to the policy of religious toleration of the first two Shahs. This was reversed by his son Hormizd II, who actively persecuted the Manichaeans, but was tolerant of Christians and even had a Jewish wife. He
tolerant of Christians?
Put down rebellions throughout his reign, but was killed while hunting in the desert. Although Arabs were blamed, it is suspected that the nobility were the real perpetrators. The
typical nobility.
Adur-Narse, who was accused of excessive cruelty and ruled not much longer than a month. One of his brothers was then blinded and another imprisoned.
I love the blinding of this period. I only know about it from a Roman context, but there was some idea when we head into, say, the Byzantines that, well, you shouldn't murder your political opponents or possible, people who challenge your succession. Instead, to be a good Christian, just blind or maim them. Oh, okay, that's great. That's nice. All four of the first five good emperors handle succession well, yeah. Thus the 5 good emperors. Toleration of Christians? Yeah, what's going on here? The title of Padishah was also used in the Dune movie. Interesting.
Was freed by his wife and escaped to the Roman capital of Constantinople. The Emperor Constantine built him a palace and his descendants served in the Roman army and government. Although Hormizd II still had several more sons.
Yes, Shadwai is correct. Everyone join the Discord. We had a... I don't know if it was a... We had a bit of a conversation about about Hadrian's succession and to what extent it was some sort of scheme, or if it was actually intended by Trajan. But Hadrian was a Chad. I'm a big Hadrian fan, and I sometimes think that, we have Trajan, Hadrian. You can sort of choose one or the other based on your personality. The aggressive conqueror, bringing in new territory, perhaps overextending a bit, or the more conservative Hadrian, who wants to oversee the territory he's already conquered, effectively administrate, govern well. Are you a little more aggressive or a little more conservative? And I agree with Shadwai. I think that makes Hadrian quite unique. And that's why I really like Hadrian. I'm a big Hadrian fan. Yeah, Hadrian was a Chad.
Sons who were not deemed a threat. The nobles elected Shapur II, Shahanshah, while still in his mother's womb, and legend claims that the royal crown was placed on her belly while still pregnant. The long reign of Shapur II is often called the First Sasanian Golden Age. Before he assumed full control...
Jesus, he was around for a long time. Also another Shapur, maybe that's also why the name is so familiar. We have two prominent Shapurs, that's always a good thing. Shapur I, we saw how important he was, and then Shapur II, also important. We also have more images of his boy lover than any Roman. Yeah, Hadrian was very upset when his boy lover died, and created so many images and statues, etc., etc. Shapur the Great, yeah, I've certainly heard that. Giving Louis XIV a run for his money, oh my. I think both Light Heaven and I think Louis XIV is a very fascinating fella, so that's quite the thing to say.
Empire at age 16. A mutually beneficial peace with Rome was maintained, as the Emperor Constantine was busy trying to stabilize an empire that had
Constantine.
spent the previous century fighting a constant...
There we go. Well, I shouldn't pause and give more information on every prominent Roman we hear about. But yes, fascinating guy, Constantine.
Series of wars with itself, when not at war with the Sassanids. Using the rapidly growing Christian faith as a common unifying factor, Constantine...
Okay. Light Heaven, mostly referring to how long they were around, the length of their reign. Very true. But, and I'm sure you agree, I think Louis XIV is... Of course, he has the length of his reign, but also a fascinating fellow regardless. Very much a centralizer of power, one of the great absolute monarchs of Europe. He's a little before my specific area of interest, but he's so important. Anyway, I'm saying we're getting off track with Rome. Louis XIV is well off track.
was largely successful. Shapur was militarily successful in the north, south, east, and west of his realm. Nomadic Arab tribes that had raided southern Mesopotamia during Shapur's childhood were dealt with. Many thousands of Arab civilians, rather than being enslaved or slaughtered, were resettled within the Sasanian Empire, along the coast of the Persian Gulf, and also deep within the empire. The Kushan Shahs of the east were brought under more direct Sasanian control.
Versailles court tradition is odd. This is true. I mean, I don't want to get way off track, but Versailles court tradition is odd, but, Versailles court tradition was developed for a reason, so that Louis could basically make his nobility his bitches. Pardon my language, but that's exactly what he wanted to do.
Large supply of Indian elephants was also secured for the army. In the north, Transoxania and the land to its southwest had been inhabited by Iranian-speaking nomadic cultures for millennia. This situation changed with successive waves of Asiatic invaders, likely related to the Huns. The Zionites and Kitterites slaughtered and or absorbed the previous inhabitants of the region. After briefly clashing with the Sasanian army, Shapur convinced them to join his cause and hired them as mercenaries. The Kitterite king and his son even joined
Shapur's silver face is amazing. It's the icon of Sasanian Empire. It's currently in London Museum. The British Museum or a different one? Because the British Museum has a lot of foreign artifacts. Many of them either stolen or, taken, you could say, through people being taken advantage of. The British Museum has a lot of artifacts from periods throughout history and a lot of different countries. An interesting place, though, certainly.
Shapur's retinue and accompanied him on his campaigns against Rome. With
the biggest grudge we have is the Kohinoor on the monarch's crown. Yeah, that's a big one, too. Yep, the British Museum, exactly. Yeah, I've been to the British Museum, and, obviously it's fascinating to see all of these different artifacts, but I gotta tell you, I couldn't help walking around being like, damn, this is like whack. Like most of these were stolen. That's something I had going through my head the whole time. I was looking at a lot of these artifacts. Least valuable artifacts stolen by the British. Yeah, the British were just conquering the earth, fucking nabbing anything they could. Bringing it back to their big museum. And a lot of different countries have a lot of grudges against the Brits for many reasons, but for what they've stolen. I think, India and Pakistan probably have a lot of shit that's stolen. You have the Benin bronzes from Nigeria. I think that's one of the worst examples of stolen artifacts. Like, that truly one of the worst. One of the most, just terrible, but a lot of the stuff that was stolen is not, not good at all. That face, we have to travel thousands of kilometers to a rainy island to see your country's history. Yeah. Ethan, how can you steal something from your own lands? Yes, well, that's the British perspective, surely. Shad Y might be controversial. Sometimes it might be better for the British to have those artifacts over their actual holders, because a lot of those places just fell into chaos. I don't know. I guess you have to go on a case-by-case basis, but I don't know. I think most of the stuff is rather unjustified. Or the Benin bronzes is one that's a good example of. It's probably one of the worst examples, to be fair, but something that was stolen. Yeah, of course. That's why you said only sometimes. And, sure, I'm sure there's nuance between the different examples. But at least the ones I'm familiar with, if the country wants them back, they should probably just give them back. Especially, I know a bit about the Benin bronzes. I remember learning about this in an art class, actually, at college. The Brits, this whole thing, basically waltzed in there, burnt down the capital city, stole all of their art, some pretty impressive stuff, and just won't give it back. And, Nigeria's like, hey, come on, give it back. But it's not happening. For some reason, there was an Egyptian bust in the National Delhi Museum when I went there. I think... some stuff can be given fairly. Like, some countries will grant artifacts to other places or sell them, and I think that's okay if it's done without coercion. But, of course, we know the history of the British Museum and the British Empire. Horses of St. Mark. Damn, Venetians stole them in the Fourth Crusade. Oh, man. Still dealing with Crusade theft. What a disaster. But yeah, there's a lot of stealing going on throughout history. But with the British Museum, you're like, Britain, just give them back. Come on now.
Romans greatly admiring their battle prowess and fearlessness in battle. In 363, the Roman Emperor Julian invaded Mesopotamia. And
Julian? Oh my. Sassanid Empire was spared the Crusades. Well, I guess that's a way of looking at it. Truly dodged a bullet. Truly. Now we have Julian. I think Julian's I'm curious to hear what people think about Julian. It's been a while since I've read anything on Julian. He's remembered as Julian the Apostate. He seems to have been a rather intellectual fellow, a bit of a philosopher. Of course, called Julian the Apostate because of his rejection of Christianity, which at this point was becoming pretty unpopular to reject Christianity. In the end, didn't rule for that long, didn't accomplish that much. But I think, I just remember reading about Julian, learning about him, and thinking that he was a pretty fascinating guy, and that he seemed fairly intelligent, fairly capable. Just someone who sparked a bit of curiosity, just because of particularly how he thought. Emperor Julian, the military commander, the theosophist, the social reformer, and the man of letters. I mean, I'm into intellectual history. I've said before, one of my main focuses is the Enlightenment, and so I find intellectual history in general pretty interesting, and so I think that's kind of what attracts me to Julian. But in the end, not too consequential in the grand scheme. He gets a mention here, but not too consequential in this story either.
And was killed in a minor skirmish. After an indecisive battle, Rome's next emperor agreed to a humiliating treaty, acknowledging Sassanid.
Julian fought in vain to restore the old Roman virtues and religion. Yeah, he did. I think that's... I think Julian is sort of an example of somebody sort of fighting against the tides of his time, the tides of history. And I always think people like that are fascinating. Even when they sort of fail, as Julian did. He didn't actually manage to accomplish much, but he was someone who was, unique, and he saw the way things were going, and he didn't like it. He wanted to stop it. He didn't manage to, but still interesting nonetheless. Yeah, and of course, we have a transition from persecution to Christians, then toleration, and then we have Christian emperors who instate Christianity as the state religion, and then the toleration fades. Bro forgot to wear his armor at battle. Bro was too busy philosophizing.
Authority over Armenia and the other smaller kingdoms of the Caucasus Mountain region, and handing over a large sum of gold. Shapur II also widely promoted the Zoroastrian faith throughout the empire, and imposed a heavy tax on Christians to discourage the spread of that faith, as they were increasingly feared as having a secret allegiance to Rome. The intermediate period following the First Sasanian Golden Age.
Wow. The intermediate period is a little more than 100 years. It's quite an intermediate period. Richard the Lionheart moment. Yeah. And Light X Heaven's also bringing up Armenia, which we talked about earlier. Constantly being juggled between two superpowers. I mean, there's two ways to look at it. Either, one, constantly being juggled between two superpowers, or constantly, despite how small you are, being in a position of importance. I imagine, depending on the situation, it might feel like more one than the other. But regardless, yeah, Armenia was very important, constantly sort of integral to these battles, these wars, often between these two great powers. The Caucasus states just can't get a break. Yeah, they really can't. I mean, if you think about a lot of points throughout history, and I'm more familiar with, modern Caucasian, as in the Caucasus, not white people, history, They have not had a good time. I mean, in the past couple 100 years, they've also been sandwiched between a collection of pretty big empires. So yeah, the Caucasus, and today, still not having a good time, unfortunately. I suppose that's what happens when you're sort of constantly at the crossroads of big powers. The Persians, then the Romans, then the Persians, then the Muslims, then the Russians, yeah. And of course today, we see a conflict in the Caucasus, and a lot of that is sort of proxy wars between Russia and Turkey. Of course, we no longer have a caliphate at this point. But Turkey still exercises a lot of influence on the region. Not to mention, countries like Russia are just directly themselves abusing smaller countries like Georgia. We have the cessation of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And then we have the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. All this business still going on in the Caucasus. Interesting period. Not to mention, of course, Chechnya, etc., etc. You could go on about all the conflict and struggle that the Caucasus have had in recent times. That's too political. I'm going to stop there. Hey, fair enough. I mean, I don't necessarily get into politics, but, I'm willing to talk about current events or modern history. And the struggle of the Caucasus has, as you can see, been for a long time and extends to the present day. Anyway, let's go backwards from the present day, back to the Sasanian intermediate period.
Which had several long-term trends. First was a lengthy peace with Rome, negotiated by Ardashir II and ratified by his nephew, Shapur III.
Okay, what do we have here? Early intermediate Shahs. Ardashir II, Shapur III, Bahram IV, Yazdegerd I, Shapur IV, Khosrow. As we get to the end, we get to some very familiar names, of course. Now, Ethan, tell me more about those Roman spy balloons. Yeah, that's definitely a way to tie it into very current events. Roman spy balloons over Persia. And then Sasanian Persia, the rise and fall of an empire by Turaj Dari. I don't know how to pronounce that, but I will take a look at that one too. This Khosrow is off-brand.
With only small-scale wars with Rome taking place during this period, usually involving Armenia. The second trend was the growing power of the priesthood and the nobility, who murdered the first 6 Shah and Shahs of the intermediate period, after they attempted to restrict their power. It is interesting to note that a noble outside of the House of Sassan never attempted to seize the throne for himself during this period. This is likely largely due to the fact that the majority of these noble houses, at least in part, trace their lineage back to the Parthians.
That is interesting, and I mean, we saw on the extra credit series on Khosrow how much of a problem the Persian nobility were, and of course this is not uncommon throughout history, just in general. Of course, this is not the same Khosrow, right? But, yep, Ilyas, exactly right. Louis XIV, you got to keep those nobles in check. That's why when we were doing the series on Khosrow, I found myself making a lot of references to Louis XIV because for me, given my sort of interest in history, whenever I think about, controlling nobility, keeping nobles in check, I think about someone like Louis XIV. Though, of course, there have been monarchs like Khosrow who have tried to limit, and sometimes successfully limited, the power of the nobility throughout history. Just Louis XIV is one I know a little bit more about. Murdered by nobles, Good thing Roman senators don't engage in such heinous plots against their rulers. Of course not. Of course not. Couldn't be Roman senators, and then, of course, couldn't be the very honorable Praetorian Guard, only looking to defend the sanctity of the emperor and defend his personhood. Of course, they would never do such a thing. There was a thing similar to the Chinese Mandate of Heaven in Iran at this time, the right to kingship, which the Sasanian dynasty wouldn't be doubted for until very late in their rule. Huh. Okay, interesting.
Who had supported Ardashir in the creation of the Sasanian Empire. These nobles probably surmised that if they could overthrow the popular house of Sasan that had brought so much internal stability, growth, and prosperity to the realm, they would be viewed as illegitimate usurpers by just about everyone, including the powerful Zoroastrian Persian priesthood.
The Mandate of Heaven is a bit different, though. I know a bit about the Mandate of Heaven. I don't know about the Far-i-Izadi, so I probably couldn't comment on that, but Shaheen tells us about the 7 great Parthian houses. The major ones were the house of Karen, Miran, and Ishpu-al-Budan, or something like that.
Who oversaw much of the efficient revenue-generating bureaucracy. So the nobles and priesthood during this period generally conspired together to place which member of the House of Sasan they viewed would benefit them most on the throne. The third trend that intensified as this period went on were the waves of nomadic invasions from the northeast. The Zionites and the Kidarites, who had been allied with the Sasanians during the reign of Shapur II, were pushed south by a new people, the Hephthalites.
Oh, the Hephthalites. The Hephthalites, I didn't know about the Hephthalites until the extra credit series on Khusro, and I learned about them then, and, we saw a lot from the Hephthalites. So there you go. Interesting.
Usually wipe them out. And the Hephthalites would become a much larger problem for the Sasanians than the earlier nomads had been. The Hephthalites gained control over a large portion of the east.
My goodness, look at that beautiful Khanate. So large. A big nomadic power threatening a more established empire. Tell me something new, right? But a lot of territory to control, of course. A lot of it is relatively underpopulated and pretty nomadic. We see the Eastern Romans off doing their own thing at the moment.
Came kingmakers within the Sasanian Empire, helping Peroz, who sought their assistance in...
Yeah, this is true. We saw in Extra Credits Khusro series, of course, the Hephthalites waged war several times against the Sassanids, and they really got involved in the internal politics of the Sassanid Empire. Many of these shahs solicited the help of the Hephthalites in order to gain their position, and then a lot of them were also undone by the Hephthalites.
Overthrowing his brother, who they killed in battle. After being installed as Shah and Shah, Peroz then fought 3 wars with the Hephthalites who had been raiding his empire. He lost and was captured in the first, and then paid a large ransom. He lost and gave his children as captives in the second. In the third war, he was killed. The Hephthalites then invaded the Sasanian Empire, but were stopped by the nobleman Sukra, who then installed Balash, the brother of Peroz.
Sukra? There we go.
Shah and Shah of the Empire. Peroz's son Kavad then rebelled, and was unsuccessful. He then rebelled a second time, this time receiving assistance from the Hephthalites.
This is becoming familiar to me. When I say I know a bit about the Sassanids, it's primarily this point to the end of the Sassanid Persian Empire. Kavad, Khusro, the interactions with the Romans, etc. This is when I know a little bit more. Funny how Peroz's name translates to Victor, but he spent all of his reign taking major L's. Sukra from the House of Karen. Yeah, Sukra, a relatively powerful figure during this time period.
And was successful. He then defeated, captured, and executed the nobleman Sukra, who had placed his uncle on the throne. The Zoroastrian priest Mazdak then came to Kavad.
Oh, Mazdak! more stuff we're familiar with. And Mazdak was another very interesting character. You know, a religious leader, but also, and at this time, a lot of times these went hand in hand, a religious leader, but also a social and political leader with a relatively egalitarian ideology, or to put it simply, as Shadwai puts it, ancient commies. A lot of the stuff he was saying seems very communist in nature. Of course, you know, we're far before actual modern, like, Marxism. But some interesting stuff here. Of course, we see these sort of communitarian, egalitarian ideologies rise up throughout history. Not necessarily with any connection to the others, but it's still interesting to see them. Did somebody say NASDAQ? Quick, sell, buy, and sell again. Yeah, unfortunately, not. Well, actually, fortunately, we're not talking about the NASDAQ. You know, no finance on the stream yet. We're still on history. Karl Marx was a time traveler from Sassanid Persia. Yeah, mainstream media won't tell you that. Mazdak got sent forward more than 1,000 years to modern history and then wrote the Communist Manifesto.
Kavad's attention, which among other tenets preached the doctrine of redistribution of wealth of the nobility, which Kavad used as a potent tool, promoting and implementing Mazdak's beliefs, and taking away much of the nobility and clergy's lands. The nobility...
Though, of course, it's a little different when you're talking about communism in this context, in a what we might call feudal system, versus communism in a bourgeois system, aka Marx and modern socialists and communists. But it's interesting to see sort of these communist, socialist movements, or something similar, egalitarian movements springing up in these sorts of time periods. Just 5 minutes left. Yes, we may finally get through this video. Perhaps.
And the clergy did not take too kindly to this, and imprisoned Kavad in the ominously named Fortress of Oblivion, and placed his younger brother on the throne. Kavad then escaped the fortress prison, the second time he had done so, then went straight to the Hephthalites, who had been his childhood captors. And in exchange for a very large IOU, a very large Hepthalite army accompanied Kavad on a march straight to Ctesiphon, where they surrendered without a fight. Upon returning to power, Kavad reconciled with the noble houses. He would not redistribute their land and give it to the poor as he had previously proposed, but he would tax them, which they had previously been exempt from. After more than 60 years of no large-scale war with Rome, Kavad waged war on them, with little territorial change. But in the treaty concluding the war, the Romans would pay the Persians a large annual sum.
Yeah, and this is the stuff that I'm far more familiar with. Also, of course, we have Kavad, who, you know, accomplished quite a bit. And then, you know, we have Khosrow coming next, who will truly accomplish much.
In exchange for guarding the Caucasian mountain range, preventing any nomads from making incursions against the Roman Empire from there. In the east, the Hephthalites declined, and began to constantly wage war on each other, freeing up the army to wage war against Rome, over the province of Caucasian Iberia, which had defected to the Roman Empire.
Caucasian Iberia, he says, to differentiate between, you know, the other Iberia, which is Spain and Portugal, but also the name of ancient Georgia is Iberia. Kavad is quite an underrated ruler. Yeah, I think you're probably right, Parsia. I know a little less about Kavad, but from what I saw of him in that extra history video, and the series wasn't about him, but yeah, exactly. The first two videos were about him, and he certainly achieved a lot from a pretty dangerous position, and sort of set things up for Khosrow, his successor. And it's sort of interesting. I feel like a lot of times when you have someone who's the great or very impressive ruler, there is often their predecessor who doesn't get as much attention, but really set them up to do great things. You know, Frederick the Great, Alexander the Great, Khosrow, all of these people, their predecessors, sort of set them up to do great things, lay the groundwork, but often don't get as much attention. Yeah, exactly right. Shadwai points that out. Philip II and Alexander the Great. Yeah, there's, I think, a lot of examples you could point to.
While this war was largely inconclusive, the important trend began of both sides hiring large numbers of Arab mercenaries. Kavad no longer needed them.
The Ghassanids and the Lakhmids, these Arab mercenaries, soon Arabia's going to be unified under a new religion. So, I'd say watch out, but they do not know what's going to hit them.
Mazdakites as much as he did in the past. He slowly distanced himself from them over the years. And later, his son Khosrow would execute Mazdak and many of his followers, who supported a rival Mazdakite claimant to the throne to succeed Kavad. Khosrow reinstituted the Orthodox Zoroastrian faith as the state religion. And
next Arabia patch soon. Yeah, the developers, they're busy working on the Islam patch. And they didn't release any patch notes, so no one's ready when it drops. Apart from Muhammad. He maybe got some advance notice.
And the priesthood in return granted him the title Anushirawan, the immortal soul. Khosrow concluded a peace treaty with Rome that increased the amount of gold the Romans had to pay for protecting the northern Caucasian border. With the priesthood and bureaucracy now firmly supporting him, and with peaceful borders, Khosrow reformed the small, powerful noble families by decreasing their power and increasing the power of the Deccans, who were the minor landed nobility. Personally loyal to the Shah and Shah, they became the empire's tax collectors and served in the elite heavy cavalry units that were previously reserved for the members of the noble houses.
Yep, all this stuff we saw in the extra credit series. So, if you want to see my reaction, my thoughts on all of that, just go watch that series. We don't need to spend another, half an hour on all of this.
There had previously only been one great general of the army. Khosrow made 4, each serving in a corner of the empire far from their ancestral homelands. With that accomplished, he reconquered the east, aligned with the Gurturk Khaganate in crushing the Hephthalites. After an initial peace for the first 8 years of his reign, Khosrow successfully campaigned against the Romans. Although he took little territory, he destroyed a great deal of Roman fortifications, extracted many large bribes to spare.
Replacing one group of corrupt officials with another group of corrupt officials, what could go wrong? Yeah, this is true. This is kind of what always seems to happen. You have your nobles administering stuff and you can't trust them, so you create a new professional class which is loyal to you and are great, efficient, blah, blah, blah. And then over time, they become a corrupt elite class on their own. I think, but, that's because eventually you die and then new rulers come afterwards. And you need, I think, quite a bit of vigilance to actually maintain a non-corrupt professional bureaucracy, particularly at this point, but always.
Their cities from destruction, and use that money to entice thousands of unpaid Eastern Roman soldiers into joining the Sasanian army. Khosrow's reign is considered by many to be the height of the Second Sasanian Golden Age.
It's not about corruption, but loyalty. And I think in cases like this, that is often very true. It's not necessarily about corruption, but about loyalty. And I wanted to point out Light X Heaven's comment, Khosrow and Justinian, rarely do two great rulers get to square off against each other. I think Khosrow and Justinian are fascinating. I think they're very similar in many ways. There's a lot of parallels to draw. And they're at the same time, which is great. So there's a lot of comparison to be made between the two, and they get to square off against each other. I find Justinian fascinating. We haven't done a series on Justinian yet. We've done a series on Belisarius, and as Ilias points out, Justinian is not a field commander. He sent Belisarius to do his work. But we've covered Justinian a bit, and we're definitely going to do a series on Justinian at some point. Probably the extra credit series. That's the one I'm familiar with, because I would love to talk more about Justinian, and I certainly have some opinions on Justinian that I frequently like to share. But anyway, fascinating characters.
Where Sasanian prosperity, culture, and learning reached a high point and spread far beyond its own borders. Khosrow's son, Hormizd IV, is noted for killing many of the nobility, and also dealing harshly with the priesthood. While he consolidated power at court, his general Bahram Chobin won a great victory over the Gurk Turks. He was then sent to Armenia,
Wow.
where he suffered a minor defeat against the Romans. The Shah then began to blame, slander, and shame his general for the defeat, which made the general nervous, given the Shah's predilection for executing members of the nobility. So he marched his army to the capital, and with the support of the nobles and priesthood, placed the Shah's son, Khosrow II, on the throne. The general
Wow.
Bahram Chobin then began to consolidate power and rule behind the throne. Khosrow, then fearing for his life, fled to Roman territory. He received the help of the Emperor Maurice, who supplied him with an army, which he used to march back to Ctesiphon and overthrow Bahram Chobin, who was of the house of Mihran. He was the first Shah of Iran Shah to not be a family member of the house of Sassan. With the borders of the empire secured, an eternal peace was signed between Rome and Persia, and with both emperors considering each other personal friends, it seemed a new age of peace and prosperity for both empires was just
that's
on the
nice.
horizon. But it would not be, as Maurice was overthrown and executed in an army rebellion. Khosrow II vowed to avenge his dead friend, and began a lengthy war that devastated both empires. The Sassanids would
Devastated
conquer
them.
the Levant, Egypt, and much of Anatolia, before besieging.
I mean, absolutely devastated them. And as you can see at this point, honestly, at this point, it looked like the Byzantines may not make it, or they may make it in a very diminished form compared to how they had been. All eternal pieces, eternal pieces usually don't last very long. But at this point, you might be saying, damn, Rome's done. It's over. But, as Shadwai points out, now we have one of the Chads of Roman history, who I think is sort of underappreciated in popular culture. Heraclius.
Constantinople itself, bringing the empire to its greatest extent. After the Persians denied his several proposals for peace, the Emperor Heraclius then implemented a
Heraclius!
to save the Roman Empire, and attacked Mesopotamia with the bulk of his army.
Heraclius lived too long. I'm sure we'll get to the end of Heraclius' reign in this video. There's absolutely critiques to be made of Heraclius, and of course, I think one of the reasons why Heraclius hasn't been remembered as fondly as some of his contemporaries is because of how his career ended and, how much of Rome was eaten away at by the Caliphate. That's often seen as a discredit to Heraclius, and I get that. I totally do. But I don't think we should underappreciate Heraclius' achievement in fighting back against the Sassanids and saving Rome. So, he's a complex character, of course.
And defeated every army he encountered. Khosrow II was overthrown by his son, who executed him and then sued for peace with Rome, returning to both empires' previous borders. The empire was then consumed with a cavalcade of familial-side and palace intrigue, where no less than 14 different rulers sat on the throne in less than 4 years.
The combined Persian of our siege of Constantinople happened in that war. First and only time two European and Sasanian armies directly cooperated against Rome, huh? Interesting. And knowing a bit about Byzantine history, the Avars were an enemy to the north, like in the Balkans, and they frequently would raid Roman territory. Rome would have a lot of issues with them and those who came after.
Which left the empire beleaguered and exhausted by the time of the Arab conquest, which occurred in rapid fashion.
Oh, there we go.
The Abbasid dynasty,
straight to the Caliphate,
Caspian Sea being the last remnant of the Sasanian Empire to remain unconquered for a few generations. While the succeeding caliphs, their families and army replaced the Shah and the nobility, the bureaucracy was left largely intact, as it was a robust and efficient machine that had been fine-tuned over many centuries, with the Persian bureaucratic administration gaining a great deal of power throughout the Rashidun, Umayyad, and Abbasid caliphates.
And these are some things that I've been told before. Some of you guys comment about this, how under the caliphate, the Persian system of administration stayed relatively intact. Because I guess it was so effective, so entrenched, that a lot of the caliphates would still use the Persian bureaucracy for a long time to come. And of course, a lot of Persian culture and identity survived the conquest of their country. And, obviously a lot of it remains to this day. So it's certainly, an interesting thing.
As they controlled the day-to-day workings of government and the finances of the empire, which over time adopted much of Persian culture as well, which you could watch my video on the history of Islamic Iran if you would like to learn more about that history. This has been Epimetheus.
All right. Wow. Holy moly. We finally got through that video. It only took us an hour and 40 minutes. So now we have to decide what to do next. That is the question. Finally, says Shad Y. I enjoyed that video. Don't get me wrong. But when we're streaming, usually my reactions take about twice as long as the original video. This one, the video is 20 minutes long. It took us an hour and 40 minutes to get through. That's fine. Okay. So, there's a couple of videos we could do, and I actually might put it up to a poll if I can figure out how to do that. Yes, I can. Okay. So, I think one of the options will be Islamic Iran. I think that's a good option. OSP Ancient Persia was suggested. Can you react to Mike Duncan History of Rome podcast? What, right now? I've already listened to History of Rome, and I don't really want to do reactions to stuff that I've already done. So I'm probably not going to do that. Plus, a reaction to a podcast might be kind of strange. But I'll just let you know, I love History of Rome. I love Mike Duncan. He does great stuff. So, no, we're probably not going to do a reaction to History of Rome, but I do very much enjoy it. Ashoka the Great. Okay. Justinian. We will get to Justinian, Ilyas. Not to shoot down all of your suggestions. I'm going to do the extra history Justinian series at some point. That'll be sometime in the future. Oh wow. We're getting a lot of recommendations. Okay, so I think the list is going to be Islamic Iran, Ashoka the Great, Dumbest Russian Voyage, because that's been mentioned a couple times. Shaheen says Alexander the Great series. We won't do that today, but that's absolutely coming up. I mentioned this earlier, but when I'm done with all the reactions I have planned, which is going to take us into March, we will do Alexander. Don't worry. Michael the Brave. I literally don't know who that is. Let me look it up. Michael the Brave. Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. Okay, well, that's quite a long video, but maybe at some point. Oh, my goodness. Ottoman history. Oh, I love the Ottoman Empire. I find the Ottomans fascinating. I would definitely like to do more Ottoman history at some point. Mughal Empire. Oh my goodness. Yeah, thank you. Light X7 is correct. I'm not going to do series right now. I will I take note of your series for the future, but I'm looking for a singular reaction to do at the moment. Mughal Empire. Oh my, let me see. Okay, you know what? I'm going to start a poll. So it is up to you guys. If I can work out how to do a poll. And I think what we're going to include is Islamic Iran by Epimetheus. Wait. Which video to react? Trevor wants us to do the Taiping Rebellion. Oh my goodness, we are all over the place. Yes, we might do that at some point. Okay. So, Islamic Iran, that's one of our options, by Epimetheus. Then, Ashoka the Great. And third, dumbest Russian Voyage. BlueJay. I'm just going to keep it at that. So your three options are going to be Islamic Iran, Ashoka the Great, and dumbest Russian Voyage. Yoink. All right, everybody get voting. There's not that many people in here, so this could be an interesting one. And the votes are quickly coming in. $14 votes. I'm not sure we're gonna get above 14. If anybody hasn't voted, make sure to vote. I'll give it a couple more seconds. Maybe like 30 more seconds. But I do believe we have our winner. Shadwai is upset we're not doing Ashoka the Great. We will get to Ashoka the Great. I promise you that. We will do Ashoka the Great at some point. All right. We have 17 votes. It's not going to change at this point. I will end the poll. We're doing dumbest Russian Voyage. 17 votes. Not bad, everybody. Not bad. We had a lot of strong contenders, okay? So don't worry. I will come back to them eventually. Yes. Light X Heaven is victorious. Alright. Dumbest Russian Voyage. Join just in time for the poll. Brilliant. Grand Moff. Druin Vale. Good time to join.
There are an
This democracy thing is a novelty. Very true. I mean, I usually all hail Light X Heaven. Now, wait a minute. I'm the one making the decisions here. You know, I'm granting... Don't get mistaken. This democracy I have given you is not a fundamental right at all. You know, this is... I'm granting it to you, and I can take it away whenever I want. I make the decisions here. You know, just saying. I mean, I usually decide on my own, but... You know, we will do Ashoka the Great, though. Because we absolutely need to do more history in that region of the world. And then I wrote down Michael the Brave and Islamic Iran, and there's more Epimetheus. I mean, there's like hundreds of more videos we could do. Augustus to the people of Rome. Democracy is good and must be upheld. Yeah, you know, at least I'm being honest with you. You know, I'm no Augustus. I'm not going to lie to you about democracy and then not actually give it to you. This is not a democracy, unless I want it to be. Unconstitutional democracy moment. Oh man. All right. Yeah, quote unquote Roman democracy. Whoops, that is the wrong template. There we go. Okay, BlueJay. I don't think I've ever watched a BlueJay series. It's been marketed to me as sort of similar to Salmonella. Though of course Salmonella recently came back, so how about that? But I don't think I've seen one of his videos before. A mix between Oversimplified and Salmonella. Okay, sounds interesting. LightX Heaven, wait a second, I'm a patron. As an aristocrat, my vote should count for more. Well, my vote counts for the most, so we'll just put it that way. Alright. It's a short one, too. This is good. 8 minutes, 45 seconds. That'll probably only take us like 2 hours to get through. I don't know. We'll see how long this takes. We might have time for one more. A short one. Maybe after this. I'm not making any promises. We also might not. Is it possible to do the Invicta video next week? Maybe not next week, but maybe just start the video. Y'all keep commenting. I'm trying to chat. Probably not next week, Shaheen. I'll try and do another live stream as soon as possible. I'll announce it to everybody when I have something prepared. Only 16 hours for this one. All right, let's start.
There are an abundance of iconic combinations out there, like spaghetti and meatballs, a sorority girl in a white Jeep, or depression and alcoholism. But like US presidents and convertibles, not everything can be a match made in heaven. And as much as Mother Russia would love to dominate the high seas, nearly landlocked nations and stellar navies don't exactly go hand in hand. But for all the Russian Navy's dismal, underwhelming, pathetic lack of
brutal
20th century, it's always important to look on the bright side. Like how it gives me good YouTube content. So on today's episode, I'm going to learn you all about the misadventures of the Russian Baltic Fleet.
Nice intro.
It's the turn of the 20th century, and what better way to kick off a new era than
expansion?
Russia is cold, which is great for
Oh man, we're also having big time frame drops. Hopefully the computer's relaxed a little bit. Ethan's list is longer than the KGB files on Americans. Yes. I've said this before. I've got a calendar with all my reactions. I've got a schedule until like mid-March, and then my list of potential reactions, God, it honestly would probably take me like a year to get through. I mean, there is an endless wave, an endless ocean of history content on YouTube. I'm certainly, not looking... I have enough stuff to react to. It's more the selection that's the problem. Just us rambling about the Romans and proclaiming Ethan as our new emperor. That's what the stream devolves into.
things like stopping Nazis and badass TikToks, but not ideal for ports. Having your port turn to ice every winter is what those of us more versed in nautical terms would call not very cash money. The Russian Empire notices China has a pretty nifty port with, get this, warm water. However, there's this pesky little thing called a border in the way. But that's okay. China isn't European. It's not a real country. So Russia takes control and gets the Qing to lease them the port. Japan doesn't like what they see, so they meet with Russia and are all like,
hey, vodka boy, invading China is our thing.
but Russia won't share, leaving diplomacy dead.
Yes, we have the brewing conflict between Russia and Japan in sort of the late 1800s, where China is being carved up by the European powers. I mean, it didn't get dealt as bad a hand as, say, Africa, but China is basically losing / has completely lost its sovereignty at this point. Its government's extremely weak. It has no control over its own country. Kind of a disaster. And Japan, taking note of what is happening to other non-Western countries, is saying, you know what? Let's be like we're European. I don't know. Let's do a bit of a Meiji restoration, something like that. And Japan is industrializing, militarizing, blah, blah, blah. and they're becoming a rather formidable global power. But the Europeans don't quite take them seriously yet. Even though Japan also certainly has interests in China and Korea, and, I mean, a lot of Asia, but interests that collide with Russia's interests, right?
Dead in the water. But that's okay. The new DLC just dropped and everyone's just itching to try out their new toys. So the Japanese attack Port Arthur, kicking off the Russo-Japanese War. Fast forward a few battles and the Russians are losing pretty badly. So the Tsar authorizes quite the preposterous proposal of sending the Russian Baltic Fleet.
Okay. So that is what this video is about. The Russian Baltic Fleet sailing around to join up with the Russo-Japanese War. I'm a bit familiar with this, but I assume there's a lot of goofs and gags that happen during this voyage that I will not be familiar with. And Light X Heaven's correct. Japan's transformation to the mid-1800s is astonishing. Japan industrializes, militarizes at an incredibly quick rate. And that's one of the reasons, alongside, of course, just straight up like racism and European chauvinism, that these big powers like Russia don't take them seriously until Japan, gives it to them in the Russo-Japanese War. Yeah, Master Wolf, welcome to the stream, by the way, and you're exactly right. If you can't beat them, join them. Yeah, skipped over centuries of industrialization, just did it all in a couple decades. Incredible pace.
To reinforce the East. And you may be wondering, but BlueJay, what's so preposterous about sending reinforcements? Well, kiddo, the Baltic part of Russian Baltic Fleet means it operates in, get this, the Baltic. And as we learned earlier, boats don't like ice, so you can't go this way to Port Arthur, meaning the Tsar authorized a plan for an 18,000-mile journey around the world, which is 29,000 kilometers, or 1,140,480,000 gumballs. The voyage was also a logistical nightmare, as the Russians didn't have any holdings in Africa or South Asia to refuel along the way. Add that to the fact that the fleet spent months at a time frozen in port, so the crew of mostly uneducated peasants couldn't tell you the difference between a bowline knot and a porcelain pot. This group of inexperienced conscripts is put under the command of Admiral Rozhetsvensky, a man so prone to anger that his staff made sure to keep a large supply of binoculars at the ready due to how often he would throw them overboard. Hey, fuck it. What better way to learn than a trial by fire, right? So they set sail on their epic quest to turn the tide of the war and bring glory to the motherland. And immediately the flagship runs aground and a cruiser loses his anchor. While they waited for the flagship.
Oh, man. Not great, not great. Also, the Russian naval flag, St. Andrew's Cross, which is also the flag of Scotland, of course. St. Andrew's Cross, that is our patron saint in Scotland. You see St. Andrew's Cross a lot, but one of those places is the flag of the Russian Navy.
Ship to refloat, a destroyer forgot friendly fire was on and rammed into a battleship, prompting it to return for repairs. Don't worry, men, surely this can't be foreshadowing. As the fleet pushed on, growing hysteria spread amongst the crew. They were afraid that at any second they'd be ambushed by Japanese torpedo boats. By Denmark. But the crewmen didn't have time to worry about things as frivolous as logic. So when two fishermen approached the fleet to deliver a message, they opened fire. The two fishermen survived the false alarm with...
Oh my god, luckiest fisherman alive. Shouldn't have been fired upon in the first place. That's a pretty incredible level of paranoia to have, but the fact that they survived, my goodness.
Without a scratch, thanks to the horrible standards of the Russian gunnery. As for their message, they informed Rear Admiral Rozhetsvensky that he had been promoted to Vice Admiral. I earned this. This wouldn't be the only false alarm, as later another...
Do you have a paid position for your channel? A Patreon saint. Yeah, I should add that to my list of patron tiers. The Patreon saint. Russian naval gunnery left something to be desired. Yeah, I'm sort of getting that impression. Stormtrooper aim. Yeah, this is true. Absolute stormtrooper aim.
Ship signaled that she was under attack by 8 Japanese torpedo boats, only to find out that there were... 0 Japanese torpedo boats.
Oh my goodness.
There was just nothing there. Having survived the Baltic, our heroes made their way towards Britain, where they encountered a small group of fishing trawlers at Dogger Bank.
Not again.
Surely by now our skittish sailors have learned their lesson. Ninjas! Streliet this bullshit! Chaos ensued as the Russians laid down hellfire upon the unsuspecting fishermen. The Russians are going bonkers. Some run around the deck aimlessly waving cutlasses to repel imaginary boarding parties, while others just cuddle up on the deck with life jackets.
What are they doing?
Keep it up, men! These Japanese have horrendous aim, Igor. We haven't even taken a hit. But hey, at least this time we made sure they weren't fishermen first.
This incident almost caused a war with Britain. Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised. What are they doing? I mean, this is ridiculous. Well, I have no idea how they came under the impression that there were Japanese ships at every corner they turned. I mean, off the coast of Denmark, off the coast of Britain, like, what is going on here? Yeah, they do know that they have to actually make their way to Japan, to East Asia, to fight with them. Yeah, I'm sort of understanding the title of this video. It's not going super great so far. Japanese have mecha subs. That's true. That's what they were thinking about. Japan with their anime powers had made it all the way to Denmark and Britain.
We're shooting at fishermen, aren't we? Definitely a possibility, sir.
Japan was buying ships in Britain at that moment. And Britain was a bit of a financier. I think Japan and Britain had a fairly good relationship, right? During this time period, both two colonial island nations. Sort of Japan was a good ally for Britain at this point, because, you know, the rest of Europe was just kind of annoyed at Britain because they were so annoying and so egotistical. Yeah, I mean, obviously this is still a stupid thing, but it is interesting to bring the UK into this. And like I said, if I'm remembering correctly, you know, Britain had its whole like splendid isolation type deal, and then they're like, you know what? Maybe you could have one or two friends, and one of those friends was Japan. Japan was the only non-European power at this time. Like the only non-European, like, major great power, if you want to call it that. Yes, they were the only... Yeah, Shad is right. There were other powers, they just weren't that powerful. Japan was able to bring itself up to the rest of the Western great powers. Yes, and Japan did pick a good ally in Britain for naval supremacy. Of course, you know, we're in the early 1900s. The first half of the 1900s is going to be very interesting for Japan and which alliances they choose and break, and, you know, they will eventually break off that alliance with Britain. But at this point, I think that it's kind of a good pairing.
Well, at least we didn't fire on our own ships, killing a sailor and Russian Orthodox priest. The British trawler fleet were sitting ducks as their nets in the water prevented a hasty escape, and the Russians fired at them for 20 minutes before realizing their mistake. While this sounds like the setup for a massacre, you forget our heroes are about as effective as a guy holding a fish on tinder, sinking only one trawler and damaging 2 of their own ships. The battleship Oriole really captured the spirit of a TikTok pickup artist, reportedly shooting 500 shots without scoring a single hit. 2 fishermen and 2 Russians died in the mayhem, so at least the survivors can brag at the local pub that they tied with the Russian Navy. This event became known as the Dogger Bank incident and nearly ignited a war between Russia and Britain. The Brits just settled for revoking their access to the Suez Canal, forcing the Russians to make a slight tweak.
Wow! Oh, I was gonna say, you know, I thought the Russian Baltic Fleet had to sail all the way around Africa. That's what I remembered, and now I'm seeing why that happened. Oh, wow. That's a little bit of added context that I needed. That's hilarious. So this had some real... Not only did it almost start war with Britain, I mean, of course, we think about the nationalism, militarism, and tension of this era. Makes sense, but it had some real strategic consequences, which was Britain was like, yeah, you're not going through the Suez Canal. Like, not a chance.
The slow, coal-powered fleet made its way towards Africa, attacking more civilians and cutting underwater telegraph cables along the way. They met up with some German supply ships to refuel due to the aforementioned lack of African holdings to make port. What nice friends, those Germans. I'm sure their relationship will last. Africa's pretty big, almost as big as my self-loathing, so they took on double loads of coal and kept giant piles of the stuff just sitting on deck. Definitely the kind of thing to land you an EPA audit. But it's not like any sailors were going to die from black lung, except for the ones who did. Morale is low, so the Russian crew decides to lift their spirits by treating themselves to the exotic pets of Madagascar. Alright, men, you all can...
no.
Igor, stop sniffing glue for a sec, buddy. You all can go to shore and pick out one thing to bring back with you. Nothing too crazy, like snakes or crocodiles. What did I say? Sir, I can explain. Watch it throw back the shot at Tito's. The ship became a floating zoo as the crew brought on a bunch of animals to roam the deck freely.
Recommendation, Suez Crisis by Epic History TV. I will absolutely add that to the list. That is quite an interesting event that I don't know too much about. I know a bit about, of course, but I would love to get more of a play-by-play by that. They actually taught the snake to take a shot. Well, how about that? Yeah, it wasn't such a bad thing after all. Yeah, honestly, good thing they got the animals then.
Including a crocodile and a venomous snake, which apparently took a liking for vodka. Panic followed shortly when the snake wrapped itself around guns and bit a commanding officer. One sailor gifted the admiral a parrot, which soon took after his rather extensive vocabulary of Russian curses. The flagship soon became overrun with chameleons, who would frequently go missing due to their ability to seamlessly camouflage. Hey Igor, have you seen Comrade Camo? I can't find the little guy anywhere. No, I don't think so. Have you seen him, Private? Yeah, I don't think he's seen him either. But a good zoo isn't complete without an underwater exhibit. And luckily for them, the cooling plant on their refrigeration ship broke down, forcing them to dump all their meat into the ocean and giving them a nice following of sharks. At one point, the fleet was holding one of many funerals for a sailor who died of illness. During the ceremony, the Kamchatka fired a gun salute. Excellent work, gentlemen. Hey, say, you boys did make sure to load blanks, right? Yes, sir. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Igor, you're looking kind of pale there, buddy.
Oh, no. This is an absolute clown show. Oh, man. Just every step of the way, just something else is going wrong. Some pretty classic stuff. This is very similar. This is reminding me a lot, of course, in style, but also the content to that Salmonella video about the William D. Porter. I think that was the ship. I'm getting very similar vibes between these two videos and these two historical scenarios. Only time they hit something is when they hit their own ships. They're clowns. Yeah, this is an absolute clown show. My goodness.
After some more shenanigans, like foiling a mutiny and receiving a shipment of fur boots and coats instead of ammo, Admiral Rozhetsvensky realized that they were approaching Japan. Ah, shit, that's right, I didn't train them. So he decided to run some gunnery practice on a stationary target. Miraculously, our group of misfits managed to score a single hit on the ship towing the target. But hey,
oh, man.
At long last, the Baltic fleet closes in on Japan, approaching the Tsushima Strait during the night. The fleet extinguishes their lights to maintain stealth, all except for the Orel, which, as a hospital ship, kept them burning in accordance with the rules of war. The Orel comes upon a Japanese ship in the dark. And finally, after an extensive list of false alarms attacking fishermen and merchants alike across half of the high seas, they come across an actual Japanese vessel.
Oh, wow.
And determine it to be Russian. So they use their lights to communicate with it.
Oh, no. You've got to be kidding me. The cloud show continues. Oh, my goodness. There was a time Russia observed the rules of war. Interesting, eh? Not to get too current events oriented, but oh my, guys, come on! It's been a disaster the entire trip, and now you finally got there, and it continues to be a disaster. I shouldn't have expected anything else, but I mean, agree to Light X7. I'm amazed they even made it to Japan with all the shit they got up to. This is goodness.
The Battle of Tsushima ensues. Will our gallant sailors hold their own against the Japanese? The Baltic fleet was decimated. 4,000 Russians die with...
And this is what I knew about the Baltic fleet, because this is what you learn when you learn about the Russo-Japanese War. Russia was being dunked on by Japan, so they took the Baltic fleet, sailed it all the way around Africa, and then got dominated once again. That is the outline of the story, and that's what I was familiar with, but all of the shenanigans in the meantime. What a curious thing.
With an additional 7,300 taken prisoner, compared to roughly 100 Japanese deaths. This effectively ended the war, marking the first time in history that
Treaty of Portsmouth. He points out there, Teddy Roosevelt. He won was it a Nobel Peace Prize or something? I forget exactly what. For negotiating this treaty between Japan and Russia. And to my understanding, it was also sort of maybe not a massive moment, but sort of a big moment in the United States as an international power. The Nobel Peace Prize. Maybe more symbolic than anything. Kind of an interesting thing. Boosted Japanese ego to the roof. Yeah, and you kind of can't blame them. I mean, Japan has been industrializing, militarizing, and they know how powerful they are. None of the European powers take them seriously. They finally get a chance to prove themselves, and they totally dunk on the Russians. Like, yeah, I think my ego would go through the roof as well. They've just proven themselves, like beyond a shadow of a doubt, to be honest with you.
European one. Way to go, buddy. Let's add that one to the scoreboard. Oh dear. So,
yeah.
In conclusion, the Russian Baltic Fleet's odyssey around the world.
It is pretty hard to understand how big of a shock this was to the Europeans. And, the Russo-Japanese War is fascinating, and Japan's role is fascinating because if you look at the time, the Japanese industrialization and the Japanese victory here was actually rather inspiring to a lot of colonized peoples. If you read a lot of writing of this period, you'll see a lot of colonized peoples look up to what Japan has done. A lot of Chinese reformers point towards Japan and say we should emulate them. A lot of people throughout Asia and Africa, they really look up to Japan after this. And it's interesting to think that a lot of that reputation that Japan has gained amongst colonized powers will dry up because Japan will also be a brutal colonizer. That's the thing. They looked up to Japan for competing with these Western powers, but to compete with them, Japan itself became an imperial power. And, unfortunately, a lot of Asia would see that firsthand a couple decades. Honestly, throughout the next couple decades. And a lot of people who'd been colonized by the Europeans were then treated badly by the Japanese, which of course felt like a betrayal. Japan had the power to do good, but did the absolute worst thing. I mean, look, Japan did what was sort of in accordance with the imperial way. It's just, at this point, they were still giving a lot of hope to colonized people that maybe Japan would be something different, an example of what they could do. And Japan was standing up to the Europeans, and all that was good to a lot of people, but then, of course, Japan becomes a rather brutal colonial power. So it's sort of an interesting shift. And as Ilyas points out, Russia goes to its 1905 revolution. So I'd say this is a big moment for Europe, global politics, a big moment for Russia, a big moment for Japan, a big moment for colonized peoples, a lot of big moments.
Is a tale full of shenanigans and blunders, with our troublemaking peasant crew racking up quite the body count of innocent civilians and friendlies before seeing an actual enemy. And yes, while they may have attacked ships from practically every global power, disabled cities' communication grids, killed fellow sailors with gross negligence of safety practices, nearly ignited a major European war, and were about as accurate as Helen Keller playing laser tag,
Jesus.
they also taught a snake to drink vodka. 9 out of 10 stars.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Taught a snake how to play vodka. Or drink vodka. My goodness. I'm getting all mixed up now. An Indian freedom fighter was inspired by these events, and he will ally himself with the Axis to overthrow the Brits. Interesting. Yes. And America, the exporter of freedom worldwide. All right, yes. We will do Ashoka the Great. We will do Ashoka the Great. But first, I need a break. I need a bathroom break. So I'm gonna do that. I'll only take like a minute or two, and then we will come back and do Ashoka the Great. With relatively light commentary, because I'm not trying to go for like another hour and a half. But so stay tuned, everybody. I will be right back in a minute or two. Alright, hello everybody. I am back. Emperor Ethan is back, or whatever my new title is at this point. It's like... yeah, sorry, audio jump scare. Apologies. Audio jump scare moment. I should have eased y'all in. It's like, your teacher going for a bathroom break and then coming back to your class. Except I have a record of what you've all said. Because, I have chat. Some Sassanids ended up in China. Yes, they did. We did a video on that. That was very fascinating. All right. Ashoka the Great. Shadwai has been asking for a while, and I absolutely agree that I would like to do more Indian and Asian history as a whole, because that's one area we've been relatively light on. We haven't done much of that. We also haven't done much Latin American history. I'd very much like to do more of those. Grand Moff, we were talking about how good your reactions were, of course. Good. That's exactly right. But I would like to do more Latin American and more Asian history, and more African. Like, there's a lot of history that we haven't touched on much. It's just there's so many reactions to do, and I mean, look, I'm not trying to blame y'all, but viewers love the Roman history. You know, a lot of people enjoy that, gets a lot of views, interactions, so people want me to continue doing that. But I do like to do a variety of stuff. So I would like to do more Asian, African, Latin American, etc., in the future. At one point, I want to do the extra credits series on Bolivar. Yep, someone just pointed that out. Absolutely agree. I would love to do a series on Bolivar. I think he's fascinating. And I was actually... a bit of a self-report. I was planning on doing the Admiral Yi extra credits series starting, like, last week or whatever, but, like, a couple days before I was going to start it, extra credits uploaded their first Frederick the Great video, and I couldn't help myself. I love Fred the Great, old Fritz, fascinating. It's like... I love that period of history. So Admiral Yi got knocked back, unfortunately, for the new Frederick the Great series. But once we're done with Frederick the Great, our next extra credits is Admiral Yi. And then, I don't know. I want to do the Justinian series. I want to do the Bolivar series. There's a lot of good stuff. Grand Moff. I've been on a binge of the History of Byzantium podcast. Yeah. I've listened to a bit of the History of Byzantium podcast. It's like there's a lot of it, so I kind of fell off at a certain point. But I loved like after I finished History of Rome, I started listening to that, and that was very interesting. I did, some of the like earlier Byzantine stuff. The Martial Lord of Loyalty. Yeah, I know nothing about Admiral Yi except for what people have told me, and that's very little. So I'm very curious to learn about that and jump into some more Asian history, though my knowledge is super spotty. That's the only thing, is that I often prefer to react to something that I know a bit about, so I can give a little more context. With, say, a lot of Asian history, I'm super unfamiliar. And that brings us to Ashoka the Great. I'm going to be relying on chat, particularly Shad Y, because he's been asking for this video for a bit to give me some context and leave comments as we watch. Because, I won't have too much context to add. And I agree, nothing wrong with learning new stuff. I very much enjoy learning new stuff. So in this case, the chat can educate me on things I might not understand. And some of us, I'm sure, are not familiar with this, so we can learn together. So, with all that out of the way, I'm going to try not to take too long on this one. But I'm sure we'll take longer than I expect. Let's get into Ashoka the Great, Rise of the... Mauryan Empire? I don't know. Alright.
The 3rd century BC was a notoriously violent time, filled with titanic clashes and amazing personalities. Alexander's conquests gave way to a period of constant warfare between his Seleucid, Ptolemaic, and Antigonid successors, while the rising Roman juggernaut began a series of conquests to unite the Italian peninsula and fought its Carthaginian rival, paving the way for future dominance.
Whoa.
India during this period was also experiencing revolutionary change, which culminated in the rise of the Mauryan Empire and the reign of Ashoka the Great.
Got it.
This video is sponsored by Imperator, Rome, the newest historical grand strategy.
Some of y'all love Paradox. I'm just, I've never been that into strategy games, even though I like the historical aspect. Not saying I wouldn't get into them. I just haven't been up until this point. But I know some of you guys love them.
Strategy game from Paradox Interactive. Build a glorious empire out of blood and marble. Take the reins of power over any of hundreds of ancient nations, including Rome and Carthage, as you slowly expand to dominate the classical Mediterranean, Europe, and India. Expand trade, build roads, and command armies on the most detailed map ever made for a Paradox game. But keep an eye on your generals and governors. Some of them will increase their own power and plunge your land into civil war. Enjoy the panoply and majesty of the world of Caesar.
Imperator Rome sucks as a game. Oh man, we have Shad Y's take. I can't speak on that. I haven't played any of them, but Roman Empire India Edition.
And Hannibal in Imperator Rome, coming April 25th. You can support our channel by buying the game via the link in the description. In 326 BC, Alexander the Great crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains.
How about that? Well, we started with something I'm a tad more familiar with than Indian history, which is Alexander the Great. I did not think he was going to pop up, but I often forget how far east he actually made it. JVR, after Marius update, the game is very playable. Yeah, I couldn't tell you, but you Paradox Interactive fans can discuss that amongst yourselves, I suppose.
Mountains and entered India for the first time, calling his veteran army to a halt at the Indus River and demanding that two rival kings in the region, Omphis and Porus, come to him and submit.
God, to the Indus River. How incredibly far from where he started. I'm excited to do some Alexander content at some point in the near-ish future, because that's a pretty incredible story. Some incredible history right there.
Omphis of Taxila surrendered to Alexander, but Porus of Purava resisted and forced Alexander into a climactic battle at the Hydaspes River, which he won nonetheless. Wishing to conquer all...
Yeah, and Light X7 makes that point. Alexander would have invaded India too if his army didn't mutiny. I've certainly heard that before. Imagine that timeline, eh? We don't exactly know how it would have went, but Alexander not only making it to the Indus River, but conquering further. My goodness, that would have been incredible.
India, Alexander marched onward, but his army mutinied at the Hyphasis River, and he was forced to withdraw to Babylon.
Boo!
Their refusal to march on was in part due to rumors of a massive Indian kingdom possessing innumerable legions further to the east. This was the Nanda Empire, centered on the Magadha region, which supposedly fielded a colossal force of 250,000 infantry, cavalry, chariots, and war elephants.
Wow.
Though he had retreated, Alexander's conquests had destabilized northern India, a fact which would play a key role in what was to come.
Okay, fascinating. I always like to see these sort of knock-on effects, and we see this a lot. I mean, the Huns are a good example, but even if you, as a conqueror, don't make it to a region, or you just get to the edge, all of the conquering you did elsewhere will have a knock-on effect. We can see a lot of that throughout history. Imagine Alexander on an Indian war elephant. Yeah, that would have been pretty remarkable.
Once the historical shroud falls away...
There were Greek states in North India. Really? Wow. Dude, the Greeks really got everywhere. I find myself, and maybe I shouldn't be, but continually surprised at the influence the Greeks had over such a large area, and just all the different places you could find Greeks, beyond what I would have expected.
Once again, we see in 320 BC that it was a man named Chandragupta Maurya who stood victorious. This Indian conqueror's origins are not clear, but less favourable Brahmin sources state that he was a Shudra, a peasant or serf, whilst more favourable Buddhist texts designate him as a member of the prestigious Kshatriya, or warrior caste. He likely knew about Alexander's stunning conquests and was given a crash course in ancient warfare, tactics and geopolitics, which he would use to conquer his own empire.
Indo-Greek kingdom under King Menander was the peak of Hellenic culture in the Indian subcontinent. Indo-Greek kingdoms by kings and generals. Yeah, I didn't even know there was such a thing, so I will note that down. Sounds very interesting. The earliest busts display Heraclius, aka Hercules, as Buddha's protector. Wow, that's so interesting. I love the interconnected nature of all of this history, and I do still find myself sometimes surprised by sort of the connections we can find over relatively large areas. The cultural, intellectual connections, all that kind of stuff. Ethan is learning. This is a dangerous path you've chosen. You might learn the truth. Oh, the long obscured truth. Don't lead me to it. You don't know what could happen.
Having gathered followers, he initially attacked the Nanda Empire's capital, but failed a few times. Then he changed his tactics and conquered the northwestern lands, which had been weakened by Alexander, using his subsequent control of these prosperous regions to cut off supplies to the capital.
We'll keep him occupied with our totally unbiased opinions. Perfect.
Resulting in the fall of the Nanda dynasty. After establishing his realm, he fought, decisively defeated, and made an alliance with Seleucus, famously gifting him 500 war elephants in exchange for peace and the hand of Seleucus's daughter in marriage. Chandragupta's successor, Bindusara.
Yeah, I know Chandragupta is one of those impressive conquerors who is known worldwide. Even with my lack of knowledge on Indian history, of course I've heard the name and I'm slightly familiar with Chandragupta. Though that's, I think, another thing that would be fascinating to learn about. Yeah, the early Indus Valley civilization greatness. This is also another thing to point out.
Continued his father's wise domestic and foreign policies, such as his friendship with Seleucus and his religious tolerance. In addition, he thrust south into the Deccan Plateau and expanded the empire. It is the second of Bindusara's 3 sons who is the subject of this video, Ashoka, whose eldest brother was Suzuma and whose youngest brother was Tisia. It seemed as though the future Mauryan emperor at this point had no chance of ever inheriting the throne. For one, his mother, Superdrangi, was a commoner, while the crown prince and favourite child, Suzuma's mother, was a royal princess.
Wow, yeah, Suzuma's definitely in line for the throne. Sorry, Ashoka. Light X7 says India's not his comfort zone either. Yeah. It's not necessarily comfort zone, but it's just my total lack of knowledge. And I'm always excited to learn. We did the early Muslim expansion series on this channel, and before that, my knowledge of the early caliphate was really quite lacking. It's still not great. But that was a real fun series. It was pretty popular. People enjoyed it. So I always like to learn a little bit more about regions or time periods or whatever that I might not be that familiar with. And I think Light X7 and I, from what I can tell, have fairly similar historical interests. Indus Valley has sophisticated city structures and sewage systems that wouldn't be surpassed until the Greeks some thousands later. Wow. Shadwai says he's not that well versed in his own country's history as he is on European history. Not wrong with that. I was born in Scotland, and while my European and American history is relatively strong, my Scottish history in particular is not that strong, I'm not an expert on Scottish history, which is my own country. Though, I've been in the United States for a long time, so, and I know a lot about America's history. But, people have different interests, and I have a wide variety of interests. Some things I like more than others, but the point I'm making is I'm definitely willing to learn just about any historical topic you put in front of me.
Nevertheless, Indian princes were often sent to govern faraway provinces, and Ashoka was no different. At the age of 18, the young Mauryan royal was sent to the cosmopolitan Silk Road hub of Taxila to quell a revolt, a task he supposedly accomplished quickly. The nature of Taxila as a scholarly and cosmopolitan settlement, where intellectual debates were often had among different faiths, would have improved Ashoka's knowledge of the world, as well as making him more tolerant and sophisticated.
Ooh,
His next
that's
appointment
nice.
was at the important city of Ujjaini, capital of Avanti province. The high quality of the governorship that Ashoka provided is shown by the fact that he was entrusted with this station, that of administering a crucial region connecting the capital city and the coast.
Alright, so we're talking about a fairly capable fella, a good administrator. That's what I'm getting so far. It's also, when I talk about history I'm not so familiar with, one of the things is that, I watch videos like these, learning about someone like Ashoka the Great, and, I basically have no context for any of the places or names or people or whatever. So, you're thrown into the deep end a little bit. You have to learn as you go. Videos like these make it pretty easy. But, if you compare it, if we were talking about, say, Frederick the Great, all of the places they talk about and the people and the opposing monarchs and the generals, I probably know at least something about. So it's a little easier to situate yourself. But, of course, that's why we learn new things, so we can gain that context. The Star Wars character Ahsoka is named after Ashoka the Great. Ah, well, there you go. I didn't know that.
It was in this new station that Ashoka fell in love with Devi, the daughter of a trader.
Uh-oh.
Interestingly, she was a member of the Sekya clan.
How can anyone forget Louis the 15th? Hey, man. Louis the 15th doesn't, well, I was going to say he doesn't get enough attention, but he kind of gets the attention he deserves, I mean, he's sandwiched between Louis the 14th, probably the most famous and influential of the absolute monarchs, and Louis the 16th, who is famous for other reasons.
The clan of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha himself. It is widely thought that she was a Buddhist upon bearing Ashoka his two children, their son Mahendra and their daughter Sanghamitra. This relatively peaceful life would come to an end when in 274 BC, Emperor Bindusara passed away. What happened next is the subject of much debate, but it is thought that a brief 4-year civil war occurred between Ashoka and his brothers.
Oh, wow.
By acting decisively and swiftly occupying the capital city, and because he was supported by his father's ministers, Ashoka reigned victorious over his brother and was crowned as emperor in 270 BC.
Okay, so we're getting a pretty classic, he's not first in line, but he's a capable administrator, seems to be a capable leader. He's sent away to govern a province. We have a civil war. He brings himself to the top. This is a series of events we've seen many times throughout history. Shaheen says Ashoka's personality change was even more greater than Vegeta from Dragon Ball. Wow, that's pretty great then. That's a big change. Vegeta gone from full-time enemy of Goku, Kakarot, to just part of the gang. Just part of the gang.
The same year, Hannibal Barca was born in Carthage.
Wow.
After he had ascended to the throne, Ashoka continued a policy of expansion and conquest. One of the reasons for this persistent policy of warfare.
Okay, Shad, why? You're building up this plot twist. I mean, I have no idea what possibly it could be, but, you're making me very curious to see what happens.
Was that in this period, all Indian rulers wished to be regarded as the Chakravartin, the king of kings, by their royal rivals. Practical and economic reasons were also important, as taxes were the Mauryan Empire's main source of revenue. The more land a king conquered, the more taxes he gained. However, the more administrative and military expenses would also pile up, leading to an endless cycle of violence. So it was that in the year 262 BC, the massive Mauryan army marched into the kingdom of Kalinga. Their past successes would likely have made them confident of an easy victory, but the king and his army faced a tough, grinding conflict against a doggedly courageous enemy. It is said that Ashoka eventually won the war, not because Kalinga surrendered, but because the carnage was so terrible. After the final battle, the victorious monarch stood amongst his dead and dying foes on the battlefield. Most monarchs would have simply rejoiced in the grim victory, but Ashoka, in this moment, felt horror and remorse. It ended up being the key moment of his life.
Really interesting. I mean, that's a man with a lot of humanity, clearly. A lot of empathy. I'm curious to see where he's going with this, because I think there are a lot of rulers who don't like violence, are horrified by this, but they keep on fighting wars and conquering and all that kind of stuff. A great peacemaker is far more rare than a great war maker, but I'm not sure exactly which direction Ashoka's going to go. And Light X7, taxes were the main source of revenue. 19th century America should listen and learn. No more taxes! America tries to escape the binds of increasing taxation. All right. Well, Shadwai's given us more context on Ashoka. I'm sure we'll see that in the rest of this video.
Supposedly, 150,000 were therefrom captured, 100,000 were slain, and many times that died from famine and disease. More than just being horrified by the direct results of the devastation he had wrought, Ashoka also was acutely aware of the tragedy that struck those left behind, the young sons left without fathers, and poor mothers who had been robbed of their son.
Cyrus the Great was the first ruler in history to be known as King of Kings, and the Mauryans later adopted that as Chakravartin. Really? That's from Cyrus. Fascinating. I mean, of course, we talk about King of Kings a lot in the Persian context. That was the title they used. But you also see it in other contexts. And, I mean, what Shaheen is saying is that, Cyprus, or not Cyprus, Jesus, Cyrus was the first to be known as such, and it spread from there. A lot of intermingling between Persia and India. That makes, just geographically, I guess that makes sense. Yeah, interesting.
Their families and loved ones. The educated and sensitive Ashoka appears to have been made truly aware of the real cost of war, even admitting publicly what no victorious ruler ever had before, that he felt remorse on having conquered Kalinga, declaring that even 100th or 1000th part of those who were slain, died, or captured in Kalinga is considered regrettable by the beloved of the gods. This was clearly not the same man speaking who had annihilated his brother and had seized the throne by blood.
Yeah. Clearly he had a bit of a come to Jesus moment, metaphorically. A big moment for his personality and his worldview, right? Though, like I said, I think from what I'm being told and what I'm seeing, the unique thing about Ashoka is that he actually implemented a peaceful regime because, we do see rulers who speak badly of warfare and speak of peace and yet don't actually do too much to really implement peace. Someone who actually does, that's pretty remarkable.
Rather, it was a changed man, finally admitting to his mistakes and thinking on the futility and tragedy of war. Henceforth, said the king,
we love character development. Yeah, that's very true, Trevor. we love some character development, especially from great, leaders throughout history. Pretty interesting.
He was not going to be provoked into bearing arms again, and also dedicated his life and huge wealth towards building a society where people lived by the rules of virtue and good moral behavior. This abrupt change of heart gradually led Ashoka to the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, who had preached the same values of peace, non-violence, and benevolence 2 centuries earlier.
Yeah, that seems like a sort of natural fit. Man, I've had this moment when I've realized war is really bad and I'm peaceful and Which direction should I go? Ah, Buddhism. Bing bang bong. Great combo. Yeah, interesting guy. Seems like an interesting fella. The only ruler to gain the title Great through peace and not conquest. Yep. I mean, I don't know every great throughout history, so I couldn't possibly fact check that. But as far as I know, I think that's true. I mean, when I think of, the great, is usually leaders who accomplished, usually important domestic policy, but also some sort of great conquests. And usually not some sort of great peacemaking, though I'm sure there are exceptions. So, yeah, Ashoka seems to be a pretty unique fella.
Ashoka had likely known of Buddhism from an early age, as his wife was an adherent of the Buddha's teachings and the faith was popular within certain segments of the population. However, he was the first king in history to convert to this apparently revolutionary religion.
Wow.
Contrary to what popular legends depict, Ashoka did not instantly convert to Buddhism after his change of heart on the field of war, but thoughtfully and practically chose a slow path which would benefit both him and the welfare of his subjects. Particular care was taken to remain tolerant of the two other dominant Indian religions, the Hindu-Brahmanic faith and Jainism.
How popular is Buddhism in India today? I'm curious. Because obviously, India seems to have a couple of great religions that have spawned from the Indian subcontinent and over a long period of time. But I'm not sure how it plays out like in the modern era. Not that, really. Not a lot. Okay, interesting. So it's not that prominent in modern day India. Really dwindled down in its own birthplace. Yeah. Light X Heaven promotes the cult of the Supreme Being. Yeah, that's an interesting choice. You might not have many fellow adherents following the end of the French Revolution, but I respect that. More popular in China and Japan, yes. Ashoka was so popular that the later Chinese kings built a temple after him in China. Though Ashoka is likely the most popular figure in India, really, his words are inscribed in our currency. Huh, that's fascinating. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with Indian history, nor am I familiar with, Indian conceptions of their own history. I think that's really interesting topic as well. I was talking, commenting with someone in the comments recently about, the modern French conception of their own history, how they built their national myth, all that kind of stuff. So I always think it's interesting to ask, particularly if we have people in the chat from different countries, which is fantastic, to ask, what their country feels about their own history and how they view it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's interesting.
In one of his major edicts, carved on a rock, he stated that should one blame other religions or overglorify one's own religion, they are instead doing harm to it, an act which should not be done.
Wow.
He began to study under Buddhist monks, and 2 years later was accepted into the Sangha, the Buddhist order. His tutor was a monk named Bhikkhu Upagupta of Mathura, who took the king on a pilgrimage of all the important sites in their shared faith, such as Lumbini, where Siddhartha Gautama had been born, Bodh Gaya, where he had achieved enlightenment, Sarnath, where he had delivered his first lecture, and Kushinagar, where he had died and gained nirvana. At all of these places and more, Ashoka erected pillars and carved rocks with his edicts and royal orders.
The Temple of King Ashoka still stands today in the Chinese city of Ningbo. Fascinating. Of course, if you think Buddhism, there's a connection with China as well. Obviously, Tibet is sort of the modern center of Buddhism, I would say, I suppose. Though, it's had a bit of a tough time recently, but yeah, interesting.
These proclamations were routinely read out to the illiterate population by the empire's officials, and appeared to be personal messages from Ashoka himself, clearly in his own words. It is also as though the king's voice speaks to us 2,500 years later when we read them today.
Ashoka was the ruler to expand Buddhism across Asia. Okay. So we're talking about, the modern spread of Buddhism, not so popular in India today, but certainly popular in a lot of other countries, and seems like at least some of that was due to Ashoka. And clearly he became a fairly devoted Buddhist, though seems to have been a pretty tolerant fella too. So yeah, that's interesting. That makes sense.
His change in faith also changed his role as the king. Rather than desiring material gain, which so many kings had in the past, he now sought that his children obtain every kind of welfare, both in this and the next world, and dictated that reporters could come to him with the people's business wherever he might be at whatever time.
Wow.
Despite all of this piety and benevolence, we must always keep in mind that Ashoka was an emperor above all else, not a religious teacher or a philosopher.
True.
He had the duty of running an empire, and this was not always a job which led to peaceful outcomes.
This is very true. I mean, you really cannot run a state with complete nonviolence. You need some force, coercion, violence to run a state. That's sort of how it works, particularly an empire. But it does seem that he held true to his principles. Mostly. That's really all any of us can do. And Shaheen says that Cyrus and Ashoka were similar in many ways, like Justinian and Khosrow. Fascinating. Well, I mean, I don't know much about Ashoka, I don't know much about Cyrus, so... but of course the comparison to Justinian and Khosrow makes sense. Lies. Antoninus Pius managed all right.
There was a serious danger that once Ashoka's supposed pacifism had been announced, the provinces would rebel and neighboring kings would invade, sensing weakness in the Mauryan leadership. However, the emperor, while he had given up on aggressive conquest, would reluctantly but fiercely defend his empire and refused to disband his army.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Every rebellion would still be put down brutally, and any foreign invader would be met with devastating military force, a fact which he made clear.
So it's less pacifism and more non-aggression, right? At least in the strictest sense of the word. Ashoka was willing to defend his empire, defend his territory, put down any rebellions, but it seems like he had completely sworn off aggressive military action. Or at least that's what I'm getting from their explanation.
To his own subjects, he also remained an almost stern father-like figure, benevolent and caring, but willing to inflict severe punishment if necessary, though his engravings almost appear to plead with his people not to force him to inflict these penalties.
Yeah, I mean, that is a relatively common role for an emperor or a king to take. Father of his people. Stern, but caring. Though, if you misbehave, he's willing to be strict. This is sort of it's sort of... not that, of course, I agree with the concept of, kingship or being an emperor, but it's almost intuitive in a way, right? Particularly if you consider how people view the world and have viewed the world. You have the family, and traditionally you have the patriarch at the top, the father, or whomever. And so sort of scale that up, and you have the nation, the family, with the patriarch, the king, or the emperor at the top. Once again, not that I agree with that, but if you consider how people have lived their lives, a lot of people at least, and how a lot of people have viewed the world, that sort of way of viewing things is somewhat intuitive. Ethan, as an Enlightenment scholar, surely you believe in the divine right of kings. Well, oh no, we get to one of the debates of the era. Imagine that. I'm an Enlightenment scholar, but I also align myself with the beliefs of the era. Not even the more radical Enlightenment thinkers, the more moderate ones who still propped up the divine right of kings. Yeah, I'm a Hobbesian. Though, Hobbes is complicated. But he was certainly a strict monarchist. Though he was important in the formation of contract theory, of course.
For example, the forest people, or Adivasi, were told that despite Ashoka's remorse, he still had the power and will to punish them for their injustices if necessary. They should, he said, be ashamed of their wrongs, lest they be killed. Overall, historian A.L. Basham stated that while Ashoka could seemingly be a bit naive, he was still indefatigable, strong-willed, and imperious.
That's from A.L. Basham. If I was more familiar with this field, I could make a judgment, but I'm not familiar with this historian, nor with their work, nor do I have the expertise to agree or disagree, but it seems that Ashoka was, wanted to be non-aggressive, but was willing to defend himself and his empire. So, it seems relatively accurate.
Ashoka also worked hard to change the attitude of his subjects, not to force Buddhism onto them, but to spread his universally right values.
Okay.
The emperor, who had previously enjoyed pleasure trips of hunting and had...
I think having some toleration is always a nice thing, even if you are rather pious yourself. And of course, Ashoka was a rather pious Buddhist. He was tolerant of people and their beliefs, which I appreciate. I also just think that's a good way to run an empire. If you're going to be super... I always say, and we can see many examples of this throughout history, if you're running a big empire, particularly an expanding empire, though this empire wasn't expanding, that was kind of the whole point, it's better to be tolerant of different ways of thinking, different religions, different lifestyles, because then you're not going to upset people. I mean, what you really want from the people is loyalty. And if you want to control what everybody thinks and believes, you might run into some problems. Yep, and LightX Heaven points out one of my favorite examples, which is the Ottomans. Now, of course, fairly tolerant, relatively tolerant, that's what I always say. It's not like the Ottomans are super... I don't know. I've had some people say, oh, well, that's not real toleration, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, look, we're talking about relative tolerance for the era. And that's what the Ottomans were. They were relatively tolerant. I mean, they allowed other religions to keep their religion. And, of course, they were treated differently than Muslims under the Ottoman Empire, but they were allowed some form of self-governance, allowed to keep their religion, and that's pretty tolerant. Pious and tolerant, hard to possess at the same time. That's true. And that is where the difficulty comes in. Often, if you're pious, you have some belief that your ideas, your religion is universal and should be spread to everybody, which I think is sort of a mistake. Ottomans were heavily Persianized themselves, like the Mughals. Yeah. Interesting stuff, but like I was saying, I think it's good for just even practical reasons to be tolerant. I think it helps your empire last. Yeah.
Wielded a mighty sword, now went on Dhammayatras, or pious pilgrimage tours, during which he visited holy sites and met his subjects. He frequently talked to local people to make sure they were happy, and would hear their compliments or complaints about local officials. In this way, he was the first Indian king to think of the welfare of the poor, rather than just using them for tax revenue.
Wow.
As he stated, the finest conquest is the conquest of right, and not might.
Wow. Yeah, this is some pretty damn, I don't know what you want to call it, progressive thinking, whatever the term you use, not super common throughout history. The conquest of might has been extremely common, And even the ideology of Midas, right, has been extremely common. So for someone, particularly in his position, to say the finest conquest is the conquest of right, and particularly if he actually means it, and he actually lives those principles, which it seems that he did, you know, that's quite uncommon, generally, and pretty impressive, I would say.
The values he sought to spread were known as Ashoka's Dharma, a complex term which essentially were rules of good behavior in this particular context. For example, Ashoka wished that people would be obedient to parents and teachers, should behave properly towards holy men, relatives, servants, friends, and the poor, and should be kind and generous to the old and vulnerable. Non-violence towards all living creatures, be they humans, birds, or animals, was practiced. One edict in particular goes into detail about how the imperial kitchens will no longer slaughter vast amounts of animals for food.
Interesting.
In addition to preaching these noble virtues to his people.
So, I mean, I'm not sure if that's entirely vegetarian, but at least some semblance of like animal rights or something like that. Kings and Generals has a video called The Persianization of Ottomans and Mughals, which they uploaded a few weeks ago. A member-exclusive video, but a great one. Okay. Ashoka did become vegetarian. All right, that's what I was wondering. I wasn't sure if they were saying, you know, full vegetarianism or just lessen the murder of animals. Of course, you know, well, I don't have the numbers of vegetarians worldwide off the top of my head, but there's a lot of vegetarians in India. I would... might be one of the countries with the highest percentage of vegetarians, perhaps. Like I said, I don't have the numbers, but it's quite common. Not the entire realm, though he discouraged the practice. That sort of seems like his way of doing things, as in he had his personal values. He didn't necessarily impose those on his people, but he encouraged, which I think is a good way of doing things. 40% of the population is vegetarian. Wow, that's really high. Or that seems really high to me. Okay, yeah, that's got to be one of the highest worldwide, maybe the highest. Interesting. And yeah, that's exactly true. That's why India has some fantastic vegetarian food. Interesting.
Ashoka also sought to try his best to live by the same tenets. This was exemplified by his thoughtfulness in the construction and renovation of infrastructure. He ordered that shade trees be planted along roads for shelter from the sun and rains, that mango groves be planted in order to provide food, and that watering places be dug to quench a traveller's thirst. In 253 BC, a great...
Is that... I mean, I might look stupid saying this. Maybe I'm at the complete wrong time period. But do we have the Tamil kings in the south? I at least know that they were, operating down there and that they remained unconquered. I'm not sure if this is the right time period for the Tamil kings, though. Yep. All right, great. the rare bit of context.
Gathering of Buddhist monks was held at Pataliputra, hosted by the king himself. At this, the Third Buddhist Council, a momentous decision was taken to send teams of bhikshus, Buddhist monks, to other foreign kingdoms.
Tamil kings, unbent, unbowed, unbroken. Yes.
In order to spread the teachings
and here we have those
of
Buddhist
Buddha.
missionaries.
These missionaries are said to have reached as far as Kashmir, Gandhara, the Greek Hellenistic kingdoms, North Africa, Burma, and Sri Lanka.
The Greek Hellenistic kingdoms, very interesting.
One of the travelers was a man named Dharmarakshita, and is designated as Yona or Ionian in the texts, so it is possible he was a Greek convert.
Wow, now that's interesting, because I have never heard of Buddhism in the context of the Hellenistic world or the Greek states. I'm not sure how much influence it had, but I haven't heard of any, and clearly there was some outreach. Yeah, it's not like Ashoka wanted to conquer them. That was like his whole thing. Ashoka the Great was also compared to Constantine the Great. Yeah. Huh. I think this is very interesting, though. Sending the Buddhist missionaries out. Of course, sending them eastwards, that makes a lot of sense to me, because Buddhism has certainly spread through a lot of Asia and is very popular. But sending them westwards, I was sort of unfamiliar of any Buddhist influence on, like I said, sort of the Hellenistic world of this time period. The rulers of Indo-Greek states converted to Buddhism to gain favor amongst the local populace, also to get those sweet trade deals. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The most famous missionary of the period, however, was Prince Mahendra, Ashoka's firstborn son.
Oh?
In 249 BC, Mahendra journeyed to Sri Lanka, then called Tamrapani, at the invitation of King Devanampiya Tissa, an admirer of Ashoka and a man who wished to learn more of Buddhist principles.
Interesting. We have Sri Lanka coming into play. Now, another, if I don't know about Indian history, I definitely don't know about Sri Lankan history, though I'm sure very much intertwined. But I feel like I know literally nothing about Sri Lanka.
The subsequent mission to this realm was so successful that it gradually became a Buddhist country and remains so even today.
Wowee.
Such was the legacy of Ashoka the Great.
He was pretty great, eh? Especially if you're a Buddhist. Exceptionally great, but even if not, pretty impressive. Early Christians had the same idea of being vegetarian is good. I remember series recommended king not to eat meat as it's a sin. Any Christians... yeah, I don't know about any relation between vegetarianism and Christianity. But, yeah, maybe someone else is more familiar. Contrary to what people might think, no Indian kingdom ever controlled Sri Lanka. At least the empires, maybe the Tamil kings did at some time. Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah.
When he died in 232 BC, he was 72 years old and had reigned for 38 glorious years.
38 glorious years. That's impressive. 38? That's a long reign. And he was quite old when he went.
Though his death would instigate the long decay of his earthly Mauryan Empire, which fell after another half-century, Ashoka had...
That's not immediate collapse, but that's sort of relatively quickly. So, so pretty great during his lifetime, a lot of achievements. Seems like his empire sort of declined once he was gone. But that is not an uncommon thing. We have these great rulers throughout history, and they are themselves exceptional. Once they're gone, it's really, really difficult to keep doing what they've been doing. It's difficult to pick up where they left off. And yeah, his successors weren't up to his standards. Not uncommon, and also, when you have someone as impressive as this, it's pretty difficult to live up to those standards. Or Augustus, it's pretty difficult to live up to the standards of Augustus. Though, Augustus did a good job setting things up for when he was gone. Or he tried very hard, and he did a pretty good job, I would say.
Over the largest indigenous empire in Indian history, with wisdom, efficiency, and most importantly, compassion. Buddhism in the 21st century is a world religion because the first steps to spread it to the world were made by Ashoka himself. Gradually, as the centuries progressed after Ashoka's death, the faith travelled along the Silk Roads as far as Tibet, China, and even Japan, despite its decline in the predominantly Hindu land of its birth. Writer H.G. Wells stated that Ashoka shines and shines brightly like a bright star among the thousands of other kings and majesties.
Oh, shout out from H.G. Wells, by the way.
Even unto this day. We have more stories to tell, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button.
Alrighty. That was very interesting. This is, I mean, we did the Muslim incursion into India, and we've covered India a little bit in some of our videos, but this is basically our first, like, actual Indian history reaction. Hopefully more to come in the future. Like I said, I'm always open to more recommendations. Yeah, but Ashoka wasn't deified, so big deal. From Light X7. What a Roman perspective to take on things. Odd Compass video on Chola Empire. Alright. I don't think I'm going to do any more reactions this stream. We're probably going to wind down a little bit. It's been more than 3 hours. But I'm still absolutely willing to stay in chat for a bit, talk about any historical topics y'all want to talk about, and hear any recommendations you have, because you guys love giving recommendations. Chola Empire is a bit more complex. Have you listened to Faria Faraji? No. I don't think so. Faria Faraji. Historical music. Okay, interesting. Oh, man. Continuing the Ukraine videos. Maybe. Maybe. I did like 3 of those, and they were interesting. I think that the first one was pretty successful. They started to sort of decline a little bit. Plus, I find the Ukraine videos very interesting as well. The only thing is that it's there's so much detail. It's like day to day that I feel it's kind of difficult for me to add a lot of context because it's so specific. And, you know, I mean, I'm not following the war day to day in my own time. So, I'm not sure. I might continue the Ukraine videos. Because they are not history. Well, I mean, they are. I mean, it's history forming in front of our eyes, you know? So perhaps I might pick up the Ukraine series again. If I have a gap in the schedule, that's the thing. Like I said, I have so many reactions scheduled that for me to actually add something in, I have to, like, really want to do it or really feel like it's a good idea to do it. So perhaps I would do the Ukraine series in the future. But I'd have to feel like I actually really want to do it or I had a good reason to. And back to Fred the Great. Yeah, we will be continuing our Frederick the Great series. I mean, I very much enjoy Fred the Great. He's just a fascinating fella. Plus, you know, as I've talked about, the long 18th century is super fascinating to me. It's like my favorite field of study. And so I always enjoy giving a little more context on that, which I definitely can give. And Frederick the Great's a super fascinating character in terms of European politics, in terms of the intellectual trends of the era, geopolitics, all that good stuff. I should plug the Discord. That's a good point. Yes, everybody who is still here. I know we're sort of winding down, and some of you guys are heading out. But I know. Is the Discord link not in the description of this one? No, it's not. Okay, whoops. I think it's because I scheduled this live stream before, or a while ago, whatever. There you go. I put the Discord link in chat. If you're not in it, you should definitely join it. We talk about history. We talk about the videos on the channel. I'd very much like to get more people in there. Yes, if you want to take part in wacky historical debates and discuss dead religions, join the Discord. The Discord is for you. Extra credits, Christ of the 3rd Century. Yeah, Christ of the 3rd Century is a very interesting one. What a disastrous time period. Abdurman, I think history needs time from an event to be pure in way of... Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, we absolutely need time and space from the occurrence of events to fully judge them. But, like, at a certain point, history is, like, just what has happened, right? On the most basic level. And so it can be kind of difficult to distinguish, well, like, what is current events? What is history? There's not really... there's no distinction, really. It is, but we do just have to be careful when we're covering events that have occurred more recently because, one, as Shad points out, we have our own biases to deal with. And two, it's difficult to sort of judge the effects of an event if it's just happened. But also, Light X Heaven exactly makes the point. Shouldn't prevent us from covering or discussing it, right? I mean, I'm not like a political content creator, and I don't intend to be, but that doesn't scare me away from covering current events, right? Particularly stuff that I think needs a little bit more attention. Yeah, absolutely. Current events are worth discussing. Oh, right, Sons of Mars. Yes, a couple of you mentioned that. Let me write that down. And someone, it might have been Shad or Light X7, I don't remember who, I think it was on the Discord maybe, recommended Sabaton the other day. Another, they do music with a historical theme. And I think I mentioned, yeah, I've listened to some Sabaton in the past. Yes, me. I knew it was either Shad or Light X Heaven because y'all are so active in the Discord. I was like, definitely one of those two. Yeah, historical heavy metal. I haven't listened to Sabaton in a while, to be honest. But I've absolutely listened to them in the past. I remember 2016, their album, The Last Stand. I very much enjoyed that. Goodbye, Grand Moff, Jerurin Vale, or just Dennis. Glad you enjoyed the stream. Yeah, I liked Blood of Bannockburn by Sabaton. Of course, we got to get a bit of Scottish history in there. The Winged Hussars, that's a bit of a meme. Yeah, they've got a lot of good stuff. The Last Stand, that's a little more, it's actually not more recent. But I discovered Sabaton, like, not necessarily from a historical perspective, but from a music perspective, because they're a metal band, and I, in the past, have enjoyed a bit of metal. And then I found Sabaton, and I was like, no way. We've got, like, prog metal and history. I mean, what a great combo. I mean, yeah, Light X Heaven points out Swedish greatness. They're representing Sweden. I mean, Sweden has a bunch of great metal. Sweden should be and is very proud of its metal scene. One of the best. Careless Rex, yes. The Great Northern War. Let's go! Yeah, what time is it in Sweden right now? I'm guessing like 10, 11 p.m., something like that. $11 p.m. Yeah. I know because it's 5:20 p.m. where I'm at, and I know the UK is 5 hours ahead, and Sweden's pretty similar. It's about 11 p.m. there. 3:50 for Shad. I'm so sorry for keeping you up so late. Libya, 12:20 a.m. Oh, you're from Libya. That's great. Another country. I always like when we have a new country in the chat. That's great. That's interesting. The thing is with the stream times, I gotta try and balance. There's a lot of different time zones out there, and so I want to make it accessible, but it's difficult to make it accessible for everybody. You know what I mean? 7:20 p.m. Oh, Brazil. I was gonna say, where is it 7:20 p.m., but that makes sense. Caffeine fueled study night turned into a stream night. Yeah. All right. Well, it's 3:50 a.m. for our Indian viewers. It's been about almost 3.5 hours. I think we're gonna end it here. We did 3 reactions today. Yeah, I would like to stream more often. I would. I won't have time next weekend. Partially because it's the Super Bowl. I know some of you aren't sports fans, but too bad I am. But I would like to do streams more often. Maybe the week after next. I'm not making any promises. I need to look at my calendar. But I would like to do them frequently because they're fun. It's a good way to engage with the community. Good time. Shad will stay up until hell freezes over to continue the Roman coinage reform debate. Super Bowl? Is this a new Revolutionary Era invention? Anyway, so today we started with the Sassanid video by Epimetheus. We did the dumbest Russian Voyage, and then we ended with Ashoka the Great. That's pretty good coverage, you got to admit. Pretty good coverage. We did a bit of Persian history, a bit of Russian history, a bit of Indian history. Sort of towards the eastern side, right? I mean, we had the Russo-Japanese War, East Asia, and then we had Persia, then India. But a good couple of topics. Yeah, we managed to squeeze the 20th century in there with the Russo-Japanese War, just barely. And of course, throughout this video, or throughout the stream, we managed to mention Louis the 15th, Louis the 14th, Frederick the Great, all the type of stuff that Light Heaven and I just cannot help from bringing up, and also a plethora of Roman history. Yeah, 19th century gets no attention. It's definitely underappreciated. I think the 1848 revolutions are so underappreciated. I love the 1848 revolutions. Super fascinating. But like on YouTube in particular, classical history, Roman history is very popular. And then like World War history is also very popular. Yeah, German unification, Italian unification, Crimean War, 1848, Scramble for Africa. I mean, we've got a ton of stuff in the 19th century that's super overlooked. And yes, Henry V gets a mention right here at the end. All right, anyway, I could stay here and chat for ages, but I really do have to go. So, goodbye to everybody. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream. Thank you so much for checking in. I love to talk about history with you all. You guys from different places in the world. It's very great to get new perspective, learn some new stuff, and I want to do streams more often. I'll say that. But with all of that out of the way, I'm going to say goodbye. For those of you who are, in the AM, hopefully you can get to sleep. But, yeah, I'll see you all again next time. And